Chapter 697. The four Yang-Chiu brothers generously handed over the custody of the two little girls transformed from dragon pythons of fire and ice. For the generals of Diyu, they also liked to keep powerful spirit beasts, immortal beasts, and even divine beasts as battle beasts to assist them in battle. In fact, most of them even fused with the souls of powerful immortal beasts and divine beasts. But there was no doubt that these brawny men, whose bodies, including their skulls, liked to keep war beasts that were tall, strong, and awe-inspiring. Cheelants, rocks, and dragons were their favorites. Even phoenixes, which were divine beasts, had very little market among the generals of Diyu. The favorite beast souls of the human emperor of Diyu were those of the azure dragon bloodline, and very few of them, including the women of the human emperor's bloodline, chose to fuse with the souls of phoenixes. Therefore, the four Yang-Chiu brothers were not interested in these two little dragon pythons, who looked delicate and beautiful, but were too small and thin to be their companions. Moreover, they were still two little girls after they took human forms, so they would not have much meat even if they were caught and roasted. Therefore, they generously handed over the ownership of the two dragon pythons. The five of them lay prone behind a boulder and looked at the two little girls who were hopping around in the valley. Wu Qi was calculating their ages with his fingers. Dragon pythons of fire and ice were an ancient species, a ferocious race left behind when the primitive universe was first established. Generally speaking, if they wanted to transform, they would need to possess the cultivation base of a gold immortal, or at least a cultivation base close to that level. Take gold horn and silver horn, for example, they could only crawl on the ground with their big bellies. But these two little girls had already taken human forms, and they were shrouded in surging natural energy, without the slightest evil aura. When they took human forms, they looked like two little fairies with profound cultivation bases. Even Wu Qi could not see through their true forms without using his chaotic divine eyes. Not only did they possess the cultivation base of gold immortals, but they had probably been in the realm of gold immortals for a long time. Only when gold horn and silver horn mate with them will they give birth to purest flying dragon pythons of fire and ice. Wu Qi smiled as he calculated, many sons and daughters, then I'll snatch a large batch of dragon sons and daughters from Ao Buzan's clan and bring them back to breed. TSK. Underhand sect, should I make a dragon python hall? Tens of thousands of dragon pythons of fire and ice. Wu Qi could not help but shudder at the thought of tens of thousands of dragon pythons of fire and ice forming a formation and unleashing their innate divine ability, the divine light of ice and fire. It was a really arrogant plan, but Wu Qi felt that why couldn't it succeed? These two little girls must be captured in their hands. It would be a perfect match for gold horn and silver horn. Even if it's not a good reputation to kidnap women. Hey, are you even women? Clenching his fists tightly, Wu Qi made up his mind. Before the sovereign came here with his men to capture the two girls, they must not be alarmed. Wu Qi beckoned to the Yang-Chiu brothers, and the few of them stealthily moved back to the valley where the formation was laid. Just as the few of them had retreated less than a mile away, a shrill whistling sound suddenly came from the sky. Hundreds of streaks of light, led by an exquisite three-colored pagoda, broke through the newly formed thunderclouds high up in the sky, and fell straight down into the valley. Wu Qi raised his head and looked up in surprise. It was an exquisite pagoda shrouded in red, white, and blue colors. It was a 7-story pagoda, with countless patterns of lotus flowers engraved on its surface. In each lotus flower, there was a shadowy figure of a Taoist sitting cross-legged, with a bright halo hovering behind the Taoist's head. The power of the entire pagoda was extremely astonishing. Red, white, and blue lights rained down from the top of the pagoda like a torrential storm. Wherever they passed, be it the thunderclouds, hailstones, or snowflakes, they were all smashed to pieces by the tricolored lights. Following closely behind the tens of feet tall pagoda were hundreds of immortals dressed like Taoists. Wu Qi also recognized the face of the leader, Li Qinghua, the son of the myriad immortal alliance's sovereign, whom Princess Zhang Le had once shown to him. Riding on two gleaming flying swords, Li Qinghua, who only possessed the cultivation base of a heaven immortal, landed arrogantly in the valley with hundreds of immortals behind him. In the valley, the group of immortals formed a 9 palaces formation that combined offense and defense. The 7-storied pagoda with amazing defensive power hovered over them, emanating a tricolored halo that enveloped them. Li Qinghua controlled the 2 flying swords, which were less than a foot long but shone with a dazzling light that was hundreds of feet long, and had them wheeling rapidly around him. He pointed his finger at the 2 little girls, who were standing next to the acupoints of water and fire, and snapped, "You 2 little bitches, cut your stomachs and offer me your internal organs, and I'll let you reincarnate with a wisp of your soul." Seeing so many flying swords coming at them, the 4 young Chiu brothers and Wu Qi had already crawled back behind the boulder where they were hiding. Carefully, Wu Qi produced a few wisps of dark smoke and wrapped them around him, concealing their auras with a mystic incantation from the Directorate of Celestials. The mystic incantation from the Directorate of Celestials was not as good as the one in the scroll of stealing that Wu Qi was cultivating, but it was more than enough to hide these immortals. Especially since the natural energy here was extremely chaotic, even if Wu Qi did not take this precaution, very few people could sense their presence from dozens of miles away. Wu Qi could not help but narrow his eyes at the sight of such an arrogant and domineering Li Qinghua. It was this guy who had driven Princess Zhang Lu and her companions, who had just come to Panga continent, into a desperate situation. If Qianzhong Dragon King had not lent them shelter, Princess Zhang Lu and her companions would have been killed by the people of Myriad Immortal Alliance. "TSK, who is this guy?" Although he knew Li Qinghua's background, Wu Qi still asked in a low voice. Upon hearing Wu Qi's question, Yangqiu Dianjiao narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, "Judging by his appearance, he should be Li Qinghua, the son of the sovereign." We didn't know that the sovereign had such a son, but a few years ago, at an immortal pass leading to and from Panga continent, this guy had told us his name, so he has been registered in the secret archives of Deyu's military court. Yangqiu Yushi added grimly, "In the secret archives of the military court, this guy is on the list of people who must be killed. The military court has offered a bounty on his head, and anyone who can kill him will be conferred the title of Marquis and given the land of a province." Conferred the title of Marquis. Wu Qi's eyes lit up instantly. He gently rubbed his fingers and said with a chuckle, "Well, let's see if we brothers are lucky enough to do that." The 4 young Chiu brothers nodded slowly, their eyes shining brightly. Wu Qi's use of "US brothers" had pleased them very much. The 2 little girls stared coldly at Li Qinghua, their mouths uttering the unique cackling of dragon pythons from time to time. Their cackling was filled with a ruthless, bloody, and murderous air, which did not match their beautiful and pitiful faces at all. Everyone present could not help but have goosebumps when they heard their cackling. Li Qinghua took a few steps back reflexively. Only then did he realize that the 2 little girls in front of him were the real descendants of savage beasts from the primitive era, not the kind of weaklings he had imagined. Carefully licking his lips, Li Qinghua said in a deep voice, "They are just 2 worms. Somebody, kill them for me and take their internal organs to make medicine." He snorted coldly and said mockingly, "Those good-for-nothings said that these 2 little worms have amazing cultivation bases, and ordinary gold immortals are no match for them. They want father to capture them himself. Why would I need to do that? I can capture them easily." Just as Li Qinghua was talking to himself triumphantly, 3 gold immortals from the Myriad Immortal Alliance, together with 81 heaven immortals, formed a 9 palaces sword formation, unleashing a great sheet of sword light that shot toward the 2 dragon pythons of fire and ice. Obviously, the 3 gold immortals were triplets, for they looked exactly the same. Moreover, they had a set of powerful defensive magical artifacts, which were 3 rings that radiated a cold, green aura. Hovering over the immortals' heads, the rings emitted a great sheet of cold light to protect everyone. Wherever they passed, the ground was covered with a thick layer of xianbing. Wu Qi quickly scanned the rings with his divine sense, and what he sensed made Wu Qi shudder. An upper-grade gold immortal artifact. It was definitely an upper-grade gold immortal artifact. Judging from the ancient runes on them, they were very different from the runes used by immortals nowadays. Clearly, These 3 green rings were gold immortal artifacts left behind from the ancient times. Good stuff. Yang Xiufengbua also recognized them at a glance. He lowered his voice and murmured, "If we can seize these rings and send them to Liangzhu for auction, those young masters from the major clans in the city would be willing to pay a sky-high price for these ancient gold immortal artifacts." Wu Qi gave Yang Xiufengbua a surprised look and asked, "What do they want gold immortal artifacts for?" With a straight face, Yang Xiuyusher said, "They want to give them to women and fool the young masters of the major clans in Liangzhu that they are the spoils of war they have killed on the battlefield. If they are lucky, they might be able to make 3 young masters lose their virginity in one night." Wu Qi rolled his eyes. After listening to the Yangqiu brothers, he had a feeling that the major clans in Liangzhu had begun to degenerate as well. 3 gold immortals and 81 heaven immortals formed a sword formation and rushed out. Once the formation was formed, the power of each immortal's casual sword strike was increased by more than 100 times. Boosted by the sword formation, the 81 heaven immortals were able to unleash a lethality equal to that of an 18th tier gold immortal. Sword beams shot out like rainbows and instantly enveloped the acupoints of water and fire in the middle of the valley. Suddenly, the roars of dragon pythons towered into the sky. With his keen eyes, Wu Qi saw that the 2 girls had transformed into their true forms. The 3,000 feet long, slender, and beautiful dragon pythons flew up into the sky, opened their mouths, and shot out 2 beams of golden and silver light. The energies of ice and fire intertwined and collided with each other, producing a deafening rumble. "Good heavens!" Li Qinghua screamed. The gold and silver streams of light tore apart the 3 green rings as if they were pieces of paper. The entire sky was filled with green fragments dancing in the air, like a heavy rain of fireflies falling from the sky. The 3 gold immortals howled miserably as blood sprayed out of their 7 orifices and they retreated hastily. But, the beams of golden and silver light did not allow them to escape. The beams of light whistled out and engulfed the 3 gold immortals, while the 81 heaven immortals were thrown into disarray. The formation shattered with a deafening rumble, and they were swept into the beams of ice and fire. Amidst Li Qinghua's cry of alarm, the 84 strongest immortals he had brought with him were completely wiped out. Chapter 698. The bodies of 84 immortals were scorched and covered with a thick layer of ice, but they were still struggling, roaring, and convulsing. A strong gravitational force pulled them to the side of the 2 dragon pythons. Staring at them with their cold, merciless eyes that were as beautiful as gems, the 2 dragon pythons swallowed the immortals one by one gracefully. Ruthless, cold, bloody, and ferocious, it was not an exaggeration to describe the 2 dragon pythons. This was the nature of dragon pythons of fire and ice. But, they were full of friendship. After swallowing the bodies of the heaven immortals, they each swallowed a gold immortal. Then, when it came to the last gold immortal, the 2 dragon pythons would give way to each other. Neither of them would eat the extra gold immortal. An accomplished gold immortal was of great benefit to a primordial fierce beast like the dragon pythons of fire and ice. Basically, they could absorb all the energy in the gold immortal's body, including the blood essence, the magic power, and the soul power contained in the immortal soul. They could completely absorb and digest all of it. The more they ate, the stronger their cultivation base would be. The 2 dragon pythons gave way to the last gold immortal, who was so frightened that he was about to go crazy. He howled at the top of his lungs and kept begging Li Qinghua to save him or kill him. His 2 brothers had already been swallowed by the 2 dragon pythons in the most elegant way possible. He could even hear the miserable howls of his brothers before their deaths coming from the bellies of the 2 dragon pythons. That mournful and terrifying scene was 100 times crueler than hell. Li Qinghua, who had been arrogant just a moment ago, was now breaking out in a cold sweat. Trembling, he looked at the 2 dragon pythons. His courage to find a life-saving spirit medicine for his father and ask his father for a reward suddenly turned into cold sweat and slipped out of him. Trembling with fear, he turned and ran away, roaring, "Protect me and get out of here as soon as possible. When my father comes personally, I'll let them know how powerful I am." With the tricolored pagoda hovering over his head, Li Qinghua turned his head and pointed at the two dragon pythons as he fled on his flying sword and bellowed, "Anyway, I only want your internal organs to concoct the medicine. My father doesn't care whether you are virgins or not. When I capture you alive, I'll definitely let you know what is the real power of a man." An obscene smile spread across Li Qinghua's face as he was suddenly filled with courage again. "Young master, I'll let you have a taste of my power. What kind of beauties have I not played with before? This is the first time a dragon python of fire and ice has seen one." At this critical moment, when he was fleeing in panic from the dragon python's attack, Li Qinghua suddenly had some bad thoughts. Wu Qi and the others had good eyesight, so they could clearly see a small tent under Li Qinghua's robe. Although the height and base diameter of the tent were slightly smaller, it was indeed a small tent. What's so great about a little earthworm? Lao Tzu hasn't told us how great Lao Tzu is. The four Yang Qiu brothers scolded him in a low voice at the same time. Wu Qi just shook his head and said nothing. He could not believe that the son of the sovereign was such a despicable person. It was the father's fault for not teaching his son well. Clearly, the sovereign was not a good person either. Li Qinghua fled in a hurry. He took the pagoda with him, but he neglected to protect the immortals around him. 84 immortals had been killed, and there were at least 300 immortals around Li Qinghua. However, he only cared about his own safety. The tricolored light emitted by the pagoda, an immortal item with amazing defensive power, had completely enveloped him, exposing all the other immortals to the chaotic natural energy of the primitive desolation. Apart from the triplets of gold immortals, the strongest immortals Li Qinghua brought with him were only a few peak-level heaven immortals. In this primitive land that had just been condensed by chaotic energy, the degree of chaos in the natural energy was beyond imagination. The heaven immortals could not withstand it at all, and dozens of the weakest heaven immortals howled miserably and exploded on the spot. The other heaven immortals felt the immortal energy in their bodies thrown into disorder, and they could not control the natural energy around them. Instead, it was the natural energy around them that was constantly weakening them. Two dragon pythons, one gold and one silver, rushed over with ear-piercing cackles. Their mouths were spewing flames, ice, and dazzling beams of gold and silver light, killing nearly 100 heaven immortals on the spot. Their huge, sharp claws scratched wildly, shattering all the immortal swords and defensive immortal artifacts in their path. Wherever their huge bodies passed, the immortals fell to the ground. Some of the immortals attacked the two dragon pythons with all their might, roaring and unleashing their strongest immortal spells. Unfortunately, in this place where the natural energy was chaotic, they had just condensed their spells in their palms, but before they could unleash them, the chaotic natural energy had detonated them prematurely. The more powerful an immortal spell was, the more destructive it would be when it self-detonated. Huge explosions swept out in all directions. Dozens of heaven immortals were not killed by the dragon pythons, but were blown to pieces by their companions. Wu Qi could not help but nod as he looked at the two dragon pythons. Their cultivation base was much stronger than that of Gold Horn and Silver Horn. Currently, Gold Horn and Silver Horn were still breathing red and white flames and ice, but the water and fire energy they were breathing had evolved into gold and silver, which was more than 10,000 times more powerful than what Gold Horn and Silver Horn could breathe out. Gold Horn and Silver Horn were too lazy, spending all their time eating and drinking around Princess Xianglu. How could they still be dragon pythons of fire and ice? They were simply two pigs. Amidst shrill howls, hundreds of heaven immortals were killed by the two dragon pythons. The ground was littered with broken limbs and golden blood. The valley that was originally pleasing to the eye had become no different from hell. But, the two dragon pythons were not willing to give up. They soared into the sky at the same time, flapped their huge, translucent, and exceptionally light wings, and turned into two streams of light that caught up to Li Qinghua in a flash. They opened their huge mouths and shot out beams of gold and silver light. A deafening rumble rang out as a thick dark cloud was torn apart by the beams of light and smashed straight into Li Qinghua's tricolored pagoda. Li Qinghua shrieked in horror and despair. The pagoda burst into a blinding light as it was knocked dozens of miles away like a bullet and slammed heavily into the side of a towering mountain. As mentioned before, the mountains here were all freshly formed mountain bones, and their hardness was unimaginable. Li Qinghua was thrown so far away that the pagoda over his head smashed into the mountain. The impact only produced a large number of sparks and a deep rumble, but did not leave a mark on the mountain. The impact made Li Qinghua dizzy, and blood kept oozing out of his mouth. But, the pagoda he was wearing was really an excellent treasure. The attack from the two dragon pythons, which could kill a gold immortal in an instant, did not hurt him at all. Grimacing in pain, Li Qinghua shoved a few pills into his mouth, then steered the pagoda, which was now much dimmer, up into the sky and quickly fled into the distance. The two dragon pythons followed closely behind Li Qinghua, spitting out strong beams of gold and silver to bombard him all the way, making him scream and nearly pass out. But, the two dragon pythons seemed to have some scruples. After chasing for less than 1,000 miles, they quickly returned to their lair, devoured all the heaven immortals, and then immediately retreated into the fire and ice acupoints to cultivate, digesting the rich prey they had accidentally obtained this time. Li Qinghua's immortal energy was depleted, and his internal organs were severely injured. If it were not for the protection of the pagoda he had stolen from his father, he would have been killed by the two dragon pythons. Even so, this Ling Long treasure pagoda was a powerful ancient magical weapon, but he was not its master and could not activate its full power. Therefore, when he was attacked by the dragon python, he was severely injured and had reached the point where he was like a lamp that had run out of oil. He fell heavily to the ground and hurriedly shoved a few pills into his mouth. Then, he suddenly burst into a hoarse cry, "Dad, where are you? I'm suffering here. Dad, please come and save me. Stop your seclusion and come out to save me." Wu Qi and the Yang Qiu brothers had been following behind Li Qinghua. When they saw him fall to the ground and the pagoda fall beside him, the group of 5 slowly walked out from behind a mountain peak while laughing eerily, then slowly walked toward Li Qinghua. Wu Qi and the Yang Qiu brothers were all clad in heavy black armors, all over which were patterns of ghost heads. Enshrouded in all kinds of mysterious restrictive spells, these ghost heads glowed with an evil light and looked frightening. When Li Qinghua saw Wu Qi and the others, he was scared out of his wits. "Mortals, why are you here?" he screamed at the top of his lungs. He, why can't we be here?" Wu Qi rushed forward and kicked Li Qinghua in the lower abdomen, shattering the last bit of immortal energy in his body. "Li Qinghua, the beloved son of the sovereign of Myriad Immortal Alliance. If we kill you, one of us will be conferred the title of Marquis." Clapping his hands, Wu Qi turned to the Yang Qiu brothers and said with a smile, "Everything he has belongs to me, and this guy belongs to the 4 of you. Which of you is interested in being conferred the title of Marquis?" The 4 Yang Qiu brothers exchanged a glance, then grinned at the same time and said, "That's great. It's just that you've suffered a loss, so we'll have to compensate you heavily when we get back." The 4 Yang Qiu brothers' eyes were almost bursting with fire. Li Qinghua was a felon listed in the secret files of the Directorate of Celestials in Liangzhu, and anyone who killed him could be conferred the title of Marquis. One of them could be conferred the title of Marquis. The Yang Qiu brothers and their clan had served King Yang Qiu's branch for generations. Although they held high positions of power, over the years, only 2 or 3 of them had been conferred the title of Marquis, and none of them had anything to do with their branch. If one of them could become a Marquis today, it would truly bring glory to their ancestors. There was no need to say anything more. Once they were conferred the title of Marquis, their father, grandfather, and the seniors above them would be overjoyed. While rubbing their palms together, the 4 brothers had begun to think about how they could compensate Wu Qi. No matter how they looked at it, Li Qinghua's immortal artifacts and immortal pills were useless to Wu Qi. Wu Qi, on the other hand, happily stripped Li Qinghua of everything, including his natal immortal artifact, the 9 Phoenix Soul Snatcher, which he had been nourishing in his spiritual ocean. These were all good treasures, as they were the natal immortal artifacts of the beloved son of the sovereign, so how could they be of poor quality? Then, they sealed Li Qinghua with a vicious restrictive spell and completely sealed his immortal soul. Li Qinghua alive was certainly much more valuable than his head alone. Even though the Yang Qiu brothers did not have brains, they still knew who was more valuable. After tying Li Qinghua up tightly, when they were about to return home, Yang Qiu Leilong suddenly pulled off Li Qinghua's underwear and spat on his crotch. "What a little worm! How dare you say that? Show her your prowess." Yang Qiu Leilong lifted up his skirt armor, took off his pants, and pulled out a dark lump. Then, he proudly showed off to Li Qinghua, whose face had turned pale. "Little earthworm, this is what I call a one-eyed dragon. This is what I call awesome. Ha, ha, ha ha ha." The four Yang Qiu brothers flew forward while laughing wildly, while Wu Qi rolled his eyes and shook his head. Who are these people around King Yang Qiu? Chapter 699. In the valley where Wu Qi had ordered him to set up the myriad poisons formation, Yu Gu was carefully concocting a jar of poisonous soup. It looked like an ordinary black clay jar, about the size of an ordinary earthen jar. 3 pitch-black stones were used to build an ordinary fire pit. Dozens of perfectly straight bones were burning weakly in the fire pit. Wisps of phosphorescence rose from the bones, making the colorful soup in the pot bubble. A pungent smell drifted in the air, making everyone who smelled it feel like throwing up. That smell was truly indescribable. It was like a mixture of rotting corpses, stinky fish, stinky prawns, a latrine pit that had not been cleaned for 3,000 years, and other messy and disgusting things that one could imagine. Then, a large bag of baking powder was carefully fermented for 3 to 5 years, and the mixture was moldy and rotten for dozens of years. At least, when Wu Qi had just returned to the valley, his body swayed as soon as he smelled the smell. His vision darkened, his stomach churned, and he coughed up a mouthful of yellow and green bile. Chaotic energy could melt and devour everything, but in the face of such a terrible smell, Wu Qi instinctively refused to let his chaotic energy digest it. So, Wu Qi and the 4 Yang Qiu brothers vomited at the same time. They lay limp on the ground, unable to move. Just the overflowing smell was already so terrifying. Only God knew what would happen to someone if they drank the colorful poisonous soup in the jar. Especially when Wu Qi saw a large number of restrictive spells flickering on the surface of the black clay jar, it seemed that the smell of the soup had been concealed by more than 90%. Even so, just a little bit of the smell that leaked out was enough to make Wu Qi vomit so much that he did not know whether he was dead or alive. It was truly a terrifying poison. After giving the clay jar a horrified look, Wu Qi exercised his energy to stabilize his internal organs, and isolated his sense of smell and touch. He took a deep breath and returned to normal. The ancient great Tao of Heaven God that Princess Zhang Lu inherited did not have such a vicious poison technique. Although the scroll of stealing had recorded all kinds of deadly poisons under the heaven, it did not have any specific poison technique. Apart from the recipes of intoxicating dragon incense and other knockout drugs that were useful for stealing, there was no mention of any other poison formulas. Looking at the terrible smell of Yu Gu's poison soup, Wu Qi suddenly felt that he should learn some of these strange cultivation techniques. If all the disciples of the underhand sect could coat their flying swords with poison, even if their cultivation bases were slightly lower, they would be able to pose a threat to powerful immortals. Wu Qi only wished to improve the overall strength of his disciples as quickly as possible. As for using poisons and other shady things, it was not a problem for him. Standing unsteadily next to Yu Gu, Wu Qi watched as Yu Gu carefully fished out a palm-sized, 3-tailed red scorpion from under his sleeve and threw it into the earthen jar. Then, he stirred the jar with a jade stick, then pulled out a 6-headed viper from his sleeve and threw it into the jar. After that, he pulled out a translucent, steel-blue toad, a 3-feet-long earthworm as thick as a wrist, a venomous blood-sucking bat that measured 10 feet in circumference, a pale green turtle with 3 heads and 3 tails, and many other strange and poisonous creatures. All of them were stuffed into the jar. It was unknown how much space Yu Gu had in his sleeve, but he had thrown over 300 strange and poisonous creatures into the jar. The jar was only about half a foot wide, but all the poisonous creatures that were tens of feet in circumference and hundreds of feet in circumference were easily stuffed into it by Yugu. Clearly, the jar was a rare treasure. The colorful poisonous soup grew weirder and weirder. Bubbles slowly rose from the sticky soup, and a strange smell slowly drifted out. Wu Qi felt as if a layer of sticky mist had enveloped him, giving him the illusion that he could not breathe. With Wu Qi's current cultivation base, he could live forever without eating, drinking, or breathing. But, the smell emanating from the poisonous soup almost suffocated Wu Qi, which showed how poisonous it was. Shaking his head, Wu Qi looked at the jar of poisonous soup that was going to be used in the myriad poisons formation, then told Yugu in a low voice what he had encountered when he took the Yang Qiu brothers to investigate the situation of the dragon pythons of fire and ice. When he heard Wu Qi say that they had captured the sovereign son alive, Yugu could not help but look in surprise at Li Qinghua, who was held in the hands of the Yang Qiu brothers. Li Qinghua could smell the poisonous soup leaking out of the jar as well. Unfortunately, as all his cultivation base was imprisoned, he could not resist the attack of the poisonous gas. Although Wu Qi and the Yang Qiu brothers had controlled their vomiting, he was still vomiting green bubbles. He had even vomited out all the bile, so who knew what he was vomiting now? Looking at his greenish face, if he were to continue vomiting, he would die of vomiting. Yugu tapped Li Qinghua's forehead with a finger and knocked him out. "Well done," he said approvingly. "This boy is more useful alive than dead. You 4 boys have hit the jackpot this time. Hee, which one of you is going to take the title of Marquis? I also have a great-great-granddaughter, who is very beautiful. I can betroth her to you as your legal wife." Wu Qi smiled. Yugu was a good businessman. By getting a great-great-granddaughter, he could immediately win over a new marquis, who would also have a province under his name. It was worth it to trade a great-great-granddaughter for such a great benefit. The 4 Yang Qiu brothers looked at each other, and then 3 of them pointed at Yang Qiu Fengbue at the same time. Yang Qiu Fengbue's face was a little unsightly. From time to time, he glanced at the jar in front of Yugu from the corner of his eyes, and so did his 3 brothers, who kept stealing glances at it. Yugu was not a good-looking old fellow, and he knew such a terrible art of poison, so the Yang Qiu brothers were really not interested in marrying his great-great-granddaughter. But, since Yugu had taken the initiative to bring it up, given his status in front of King Yang Qiu, he could not refuse. Marrying a legal wife who looked like Yugu and spent every day concocting poisons in her bedroom? At the thought of the terrible marriage life in the future, Yang Qiu Fengbue's face turned green. But, he could not refuse. Looking at the 3 fingers in front of his nose, Yang Qiu Fengbue wanted to cry but had no tears. Wu Qi was laughing in his heart. He was too lazy to pay any attention to this group of people. Then, he looked at Yugu, who kept taking out countless strange poisons that made Wu Qi's hair stand on end and adding them into the jar. His hair stood on end, and he hurriedly excused himself with the excuse that he needed to check out the layout of the formation. Fortunately, he had Yugu, an old venomous being, with him. Otherwise, he would not have been able to construct the myriad poisons formation. Although he knew the diagram of the myriad poisons formation, and it did have a terrible power that could scare ghosts and deities away, where could Wu Qi find those terrible poisons? Fortunately, Yugu had been cultivating the art of poison since he was a child, and there were all kinds of ancient monsters in his supreme tower. With that, he was able to gather enough materials to lay out the myriad poisons formation. As soon as he entered the valley, Wu Qi saw Dayu's soldiers carefully laying out formation discs, flags, and weapons of slaughter in various places. They were all obtained from King Yang Qiu's warehouse, and each of them was of the finest grade. It was the most extravagant formation Wu Qi had laid out in all these years. Even the most basic formation discs were made of materials that could be used to craft supreme-grade heaven immortal artifacts, which showed how amazing the cost of the formation was. Inside the supreme tower where Yugu had parked in the depths of the valley, expert craftsmen sent here by King Yang Qiu were crafting all kinds of formation discs, flags, and weapons of slaughter, all of which were made according to the diagram of the myriad poisons formation given by Wu Qi. Generals and soldiers were coming in and out of the Supreme Tower, carrying out a large number of formation discs and flags that had just been crafted and sent out in all directions. Wu Qi looked around and found that everything had been laid out according to his plan. These Dayu's soldiers were well-trained elites, and their every move was perfect. Wu Qi was very pleased to see them. As long as he could kill the sovereign, not only would he be able to vent the anger of Princess Xianglu and Wu Qi, but the credit would also be enough for Wu Qi to reap endless benefits. At the thought of this, Wu Qi could not help but smile. Just as Wu Qi was feeling proud of himself, an arrogant voice suddenly rang out from the top of a nearby mountain peak. "It's wrong for you to lay out the formation like this. Let me teach you how to do it. Move these 3 formation discs 30 feet to the west, so that they can communicate with the formation discs in the distance." Wu Qi was taken aback, and then a burst of anger surged out of his heart. This mountain peak was one of the main support points of the west side of the entire Myriad Poisons formation, and the formation discs and flags on it were all made of rare materials that could be used to craft gold immortal artifacts. By randomly changing the positions of the formation discs and flags, it was very likely that the power of the entire Myriad Poisons formation would be weakened. Furious, Wu Qi soared into the air and landed on the mountain peak. Without looking at the person clearly, he snapped, "Which idiot is talking nonsense here? Who said we should move the formation discs and flags?" More than 100 soldiers were placing the formation discs and flags on the mountain peak, while a few oracles were sketching runes on the ground. Upon seeing the arrival of Wu Qi, the commander in charge of the formation, these soldiers and oracles hastily bowed to him. Only a few young men and women clad in white on the mountain peak, who looked as if they were on an outing, held their heads up proudly and looked disdainfully at Wu Qi. One of the young men pointed a finger at Wu Qi and said with a cold grin, "Tan Lang, you're just a rough man from the wilderness. Even if you've obtained the blueprint of some formation, do you know what an array is? Do you know the essence of an array? Do you know what yin and yang and the 5 elements are, and what yin and yang are? You're such an idiot. Do you think that just laying out a formation according to the blueprint without making any changes can be considered as a complete formation?" Another young man pointed a finger at Wu Qi arrogantly and said with a cold grin, "According to the way you laid out the formation, it would be strange if the people trapped in it could not escape easily. I, your young master, am known as the best in the field of formations under Master Yu's tutelage. For the sake of His Highness's great plan, I've kindly taught these useless subordinates of yours, and at the same time, I'll give you some pointers, so that you can understand what it means to. I'm calling you mother." Wu Qi was too lazy to listen to the shouts of Yu Qingqing's disciples. He pounced on them like a tiger and sent them flying away with a series of punches and kicks, who were eloquent but whose cultivation bases had not even reached the first Panga heaven. "Scram! If you dare to make trouble here again, even Yu Qingqing won't be able to save you." Without hesitation, Wu Qi knocked out the teeth of the 2 men who had spoken just now, scattering them all over the ground. When they saw that Wu Qi was so powerful, the group of men and women hurriedly picked up their injured companions and fled in panic. After running hundreds of feet away, one of the young men turned back, pointed a finger at Wu Qi, and bellowed, "Tan Lang, you stubbornly refuse to listen to our harsh advice. If you let go of the enemy that His Highness wants to kill, you'll be sentenced to death." Wu Qi's heart gave a jerk. There seemed to be a hidden meaning in these people's words. Chapter 700. While Wu Qi was in charge of setting up the formation to kill the sovereign, Yu Qingqing's disciple had been fiddling with the formation and changing it. Was this Yu Qingqing's intention? Did he want to ruin Wu Qi's plan and make it impossible for him to set up the formation? Yu Qingqing was not that stupid, was he? If so, why did his disciple do that in the valley? By assigning Wu Qi the task of setting up the formation, King Yang Qiu had given Wu Qi the most important task of killing the sovereign to him. Such trust was indeed commendable, but in Yu Qingqing's eyes, did it not mean that he did not trust the people of Yu Academy too much? It was hard to say if Yu Qingqing would do something strange. After all, he had been working for King Yang Qiu's father for a long time, while Wu Qi was just a newcomer. Following the Supreme Tower all the way to the valley outside, Wu Qi carefully patrolled the place. In the forging rooms on the ground floor of the Supreme Tower, 800 skilled craftsmen sent here by King Yang Qiu were forging all kinds of formation discs and flags with the underground flame spewed out of the underground flame vein. These craftsmen were all experts in forging all kinds of magical items. With just a glance at the various formation discs and flags required for the myriad poisons formation, they were able to forge all the items flawlessly like a digital machine tool. Wu Qi glanced at these craftsmen with his divine sense. They were all working hard, and none of them had any unusual expression on their faces. The soldiers who were moving formation boards, flags, and other tools in and out of the workshop did not seem to be affected at all. They entered the forging room in neat rows, and according to the number of formation boards and flags indicated on the formation map, they carried out these tools that emitted faint spiritual energy fluctuations and handed them to the soldiers who were setting up the formation outside according to the formation map. Wu Qi kept a close eye on the soldiers who were carrying the formation discs and flags. They were all carrying out their tasks dutifully, and he did not see anyone tampering with the formation discs and flags. As for the soldiers who were placing the formation discs and flags, they were even more attentive. After all, Dayu's military law was very strict. If they dared to make any mistakes in the placement of the formation discs and flags, once King Yang Qiu found out, not only would they be in trouble, but even their clansmen would be implicated. Apart from Yu Qingqing's white-clad disciples who were wandering around and pointing at the formation from time to time, there was nothing unusual. Yu Qingqing, you'd better not spoil my plan, or Yan Dan will be very happy to talk to you. With a chaotic gleam flashing in his eyes, Wu Qi glanced coldly at the disciples of Yu Academy, who were sent here by Yu Qingqing in the name of helping Wu Qi share the burden. He clenched his fists tightly. Time went by day after day. It was not a matter of a day or two to arrange a formation to deal with a formidable immortal like the sovereign, who held great power in the celestial court and whose cultivation base had reached the realm of primordial immortal. According to Wu Qi's estimation, it would take more than 2 months to set up all the formation discs and flags and fully activate the formation, even if everything went smoothly. If the sovereign arrived before the formation was completed, there would be a lot of fun to watch. Therefore, Wu Qi personally joined the construction of the formation. He knew everything about the 10,000 poison formation by heart. All the vital points were personally arranged by him, and with his guidance, the 10,000 poison formation had taken shape in just half a month. A murderous aura gradually rose up into the sky in the huge valley, but this murderous aura was blocked by some kind of invisible barrier, and could only circle around in the valley. But, during the past half a month, a rumor began to spread among the soldiers who deployed the formation that the myriad poisons formation was just a donkey's dung egg that looked good, and in fact, it did not have any power. On several occasions, Wu Qi had overheard the soldiers whispering to each other while they were working. The myriad poisons formation could only trap and kill heaven immortals at most, and it had no power over gold immortals, let alone the sovereign of myriad immortal alliance. Some even said that Wu Qi was just an illiterate hunter who was lucky enough to obtain some formation blueprints, but in fact, he did not even know the most basic way of setting up formations. The power of the myriad poisons formation was great, but because it was Wu Qi who had modified it, it had become worthless. Some even secretly said that Wu Qi was just lucky to break the formation when he was serving in Bo Yunting's army, and that all the credit belonged to Bo Yunting. Had it not been for Bo Yunting's wisdom and the power of a celestial being, there was no way he could have broken the formation. Some even swore that Bo Yunting had been conferred the title of Marquis because of this great contribution. The human emperor was wise, and he had his reasons for conferring titles. The fact that Bo Yunting was conferred the title of Marquis proved that the formation was indeed broken by him. In order to convince the soldiers that the destruction of the formation had nothing to do with Wu Qi, someone vividly described to them how extraordinary Bo Yunting's father, Bo Zhongfu, was. He said that the Bo clan was a close subject of the human emperor, and that every generation of their members were erudite, and that they had a deep understanding of the immortals' formations. That was why they were able to destroy the formation so easily. Since the members of the Bo clan were so skilled in the Tao of formations, it must be Bo Yunting who broke the formation, and it had nothing to do with Wu Qi. So, the soldiers were secretly thinking that if the myriad poisons formation really could not trap the sovereign, then wouldn't King Yangqiu's plan to ambush him fail miserably? It was not a big deal if they failed to kill the sovereign, but if they failed, they would be killed. Who did not know the power of immortals? Their immortal swords and immortal thunders were incredibly lethal. King Yangqiu and Wu Qi were both high-ranking officials in the army, and if they failed, they would certainly be able to escape. But, weren't the soldiers in the formation the unlucky ones? Rumors spread one after another, and all kinds of unfavorable statements against Wu Qi spread through the army in just 2 or 3 days. When the soldiers began to discuss these remarks against Wu Qi, their morale was shaken. Their work efficiency plummeted, and their attitude became careless. The formation work, which used to be as precise and reliable as an assembly line, had now become like a hairy wild boar embroidering a flower. Everything had become too horrible to look at. Once again, when Wu Qi discovered that a few absent-minded soldiers had placed the formation discs on one of the pivots of the formation in the wrong position, and a few extremely powerful weapons deployed near the discs were placed in the wrong positions as well, Wu Qi became really angry. No matter who was behind these rumors, at least he was now paid by King Yangqiu, and he was supposed to work for King Yangqiu wholeheartedly instead of hindering him from behind. Even a man like Wu Qi, who never regarded himself as King Yangqiu's subordinate, is wholeheartedly laying out the formation to help King Yangqiu make a great contribution. As King Yangqiu's confidant, how could you do such a thing? Flustered and exasperated, Wu Qi stood on a lofty mountain overlooking the whole valley. After a full 2 hours of careful planning, a few fiend shadows suddenly flashed under his feet. With a sinister smile on his face, Wu Qi murmured in a low voice, "Since you want to play, let's have a good time." Carrying a large number of materials and immortal stones, the fiend shadows swarmed in all directions and began to lay out their formations inside and outside the valley. Yu Gu, the only person in the valley who could see through the movements of these celestial fiend puppets, was nervously brewing a pot of poisonous soup. No one else, whether it was the soldiers led by the Yangqiu brothers or the oracles in the Supreme Tower, could see through the movements of these puppets who were using the innate escape art found in the Scroll of Stealing. Therefore, Wu Qi boldly allowed them to do whatever they wanted in the valley, making fine adjustments to the myriad poisons formation inch by inch. If you want to make trouble, then go ahead. Wu Qi was determined to let these people know what a real expert in formations was. Didn't you, Yu Qingcheng, say that Wu Qi knows nothing about the Tao of formations? Let's see how Wu Qi slaps your face when the time comes. Time continued to pass as Wu Qi worked intensely. The rumors about Wu Qi in the valley became more and more unbearable. When the soldiers saw that Wu Qi did not respond to the previous rumors, they spread them faster and faster, and they became bolder and more unscrupulous when discussing them. Wu Qi had once laid out a formation in front of a small mountain. Hundreds of feet behind the mountain, a group of soldiers squatted in a row and dawdled on the ground, discussing the fact that Wu Qi had offered all his 18 wives to King Yangqiu to warm his bed. King Yangqiu was overjoyed, so he specially transferred Wu Qi to his side as his personal guard. This time, it was Wu Qi who offered his mother and grandmother to King Yangqiu's father, King Yangshan. King Yangshan was very satisfied with them, and that was why he put Wu Qi in charge of laying out the formation and ambushing the sovereign. In addition to this kind of direct personal attack, there were also some more absurd rumors, such as that Wu Qi was simply a gigolo, and that King Yangqiu had taken a fancy to his beauty, and that was why he supported him. Some even said that Wu Qi was not very good-looking, and that it was Wu Qi's twin brother who had caught King Yangqiu's attention at first glance. That was why King Yangqiu was so concerned about his brother-in-law. Wu Qi threw his head back and sighed. The thought of killing those who spread the rumors rose in his mind. No matter who it is, when this is over, I'll teach you a lesson. Yu Qingcheng. Or someone else. I don't care who it is. Even if I killed the wrong person, since I've insulted my family, I'll just have to wait to be stabbed. Amidst Wu Qi's cold laughter, the formation of myriad poisons formation was finally completed in a sloppy way. As Yu Gu's jar of poisonous soup was completed, Wu Qi began to smear it on all the magical artifacts in the formation. At the same time, Yu Gu also put the countless poisonous insects, beasts, flowers, and grasses he kept in his supreme tower into the formation, turning the valley into a land of deadly poison. In particular, he put the medicinal soup in the pond in the secret chamber where Wu Qi had kidnapped King Yang Qiu that day into the valley. The small pond turned into a torrential wave that swept across the valley, and wherever it passed, poisonous mosses of various colors sprouted from the ground. A few inches of moss covered the entire valley. The moss was wriggling like worms. It was a terrifying sight to behold. Standing on the peak of a lofty mountain, Wu Qi could hear the whispers and comments of the soldiers around him, and he could not help but nod his head in satisfaction when he saw the valley had suddenly turned into a land of deadly poison. Yu Gu's foundation was better than Wu Qi had imagined. Of the 10,000 poisons recorded in the Scroll of Stealing, Yu Gu had collected 1,092 of them. The power of this myriad poisons formation was not weak at all. "Where are you, Sovereign?" After the myriad poisons formation was set up, another supreme tower came through the void and brought King Yang Qiu and a group of elite generals and generals he had gathered. After circling the valley, the supreme tower sped away into the distance, seemingly uninterested in King Yang Qiu's killing of the sovereign. King Yang Qiu had arrived with all his trusted ministers, waiting for the sovereign's arrival. Chapter 701. In the valley where the myriad poisons formation was hidden, Yu Gu had opened up a small hall with his mighty magic power. King Yang Qiu and his confidants were having a meeting in the hall. In order to kill the sovereign, King Yang Qiu had brought all the experts around him. There were more than 1,000 generals and oracles who were gold immortals, and together with Yu Gu, a supreme oracle whose overall strength was strong enough to fight a primordial immortal, their overall strength was truly terrifying. In addition to these experts, King Yang Qiu had also deployed an army of 120,000 soldiers to the myriad poisons formation, each holding a formation flag. The army of 120,000 were elites who had cultivated various cultivation techniques of the human race, and all of them had the cultivation base of the 7 stars realm of the first Pangu heaven or above. Any soldier in this army was strong enough to control a small heavenly realm in outer heavenly realms. At the moment, only King Yang Qiu and dozens of his trusted generals were discussing something in the hall Yu Gu had built. Wu Qi was holding the diagram of the myriad poisons formation in his hand, explaining its various mysteries to King Yang Qiu and the others. The formation was vicious and sinister, a pure killing formation. Once it was activated, it would be filled with deadly poisons. Thousands of poisons were fused into one, turning into invisible poisons that could hurt people without being noticed. In addition to that, there were also countless poisonous insects and beasts hiding in the dark to hurt people. It was a very powerful formation. Everyone in the hall was listening carefully to Wu Qi's explanation of the functions of the formation and what they needed to pay attention to. Yu Qingxing was the only one who was sitting in his four-wheeled wooden chariot, stroking his beard and smiling disapprovingly. From time to time, he glanced at King Yang Qiu out of the corner of his eye, then suddenly clapped his hands and burst into laughter. General Tan Lang seems to be very confident in the power of this formation, isn't he? If something goes wrong with this myriad poisons formation and the sovereign manages to escape, who should bear the responsibility for the great effort that your highness has put in and spent so many materials to construct this formation? King Yang Qiu narrowed his eyes and looked at Wu Qi without saying a word. Wu Qi gave Yu Qingxing a look and said with a faint smile, "Your Highness, how can there be a foolproof formation in the world?" Yu Qingxing smiled. Just as he was about to boast about his attainments in formations, he suddenly realized that he could not continue the conversation, so he quickly shut his mouth and glared angrily at Wu Qi. If Yu Qingxing told King Yang Qiu that his formation was stronger than Wu Qi's myriad poisons formation, the consequences would be dire. Once the sovereign broke out of the formation, there would certainly be people who would gossip about him. Why didn't you offer the formation map to serve His Highness when you have such a high attainment in formations? With a cold snort, Yu Qingxing said dryly, "In any case, this operation is extremely important. If it succeeds, Your Highness will be rewarded with a great merit. General Tan Lang has to take responsibility for the expenditure of so much manpower and resources. Wu Qi ignored Yu Qingqing's words. Instead, he cupped his fist and said to King Yang Qiu, Your Highness, I've done my best to lay out the myriad poisons formation. King Yang Qiu nodded slowly and cried out in a deep voice, Tan Lang has done his best. If the myriad poisons formation can't kill the sovereign, it means he is not fated to die. In short, we've captured the sovereign's son alive, and that's a considerable credit. If we succeed in killing the sovereign, it'll be great, but if we fail, it's not worth anything. We can just treat it as training for our soldiers. Yu Qingqing frowned slightly. It made him very uncomfortable that King Yang Qiu had such an attitude toward Wu Qi. Wu Qi, on the other hand, cupped his fist and bowed to King Yang Qiu, then turned to give Yu Qingqing a cold look. King Yang Qiu snorted coldly, leaned back on his throne, and said in a low voice, Let's not talk about anything else, but I heard that someone started a rumor to shake the morale of the army when we were laying out the formation. If the sovereign is killed, I won't bother to look into it. But, if he really manages to break out of the formation and escape, don't blame me for getting to the bottom of this matter. No matter who is behind this, I'll definitely punish him severely. Yu Qingqing's smile froze slightly, and then his smile became even more relaxed, like a lofty expert. King Yang Qiu's fingers moved slightly, and a palm-sized square jade tablet with a ferocious dragon carved on it flew out and fell into Wu Qi's hand. This is a mystic technique of Deyu's secret palace, the dragon kill, he said in a low voice. It's a set of mystic arts that specializes in cultivating both fleshly body and magic. It's based on the dragon transformation script of dragons, and combined with various mystic arts of Deyu. It's extremely powerful. Tan Lang, give it a try and see if you can cultivate it. After taking the jade tablet, Wu Qi sent his divine sense into it, and immediately, countless mystic arts poured into it. As King Yang Qiu said, this was a powerful divine ability based on the dragon transformation script of dragons, and combined with various mystic arts of Deyu. With the fleshly body as the foundation and powerful mystic arts of magic, it could unleash an extraordinarily terrible lethality. With the dragon transformation script as the foundation, Wu Qi could not help but chuckle in his heart. He had now cultivated the dragon transformation script to the peak realm of heavenly dragon transformation, and this dragon kill was just right for him. Immediately, Wu Qi held the jade tablet in his hand and quickly transformed the chaotic energy in his body into billowing dragon energy, which flowed rapidly through his extremely wide meridians like a great river. Other cultivators and immortals might make some noise when their immortal energy flowed through their meridians, but it would never produce such a terrible sound as Wu Qi's. A huge sound wave rushed out of Wu Qi's body, and everyone could see waves of dark dragon energy tumbling rapidly under Wu Qi's skin. It was as if the Milky Way was rolling backward, or dozens of seas were overturned with a single palm strike. Yu Qingqing's face suddenly turned livid. Staring blankly at Wu Qi, he scolded in a low voice, What a freak! King Yang Qiu's eyes went wide. He rose to his feet with joy, nodded repeatedly, and praised, Wonderful! The aptitude of a man who cultivates both fleshly body and magic is indeed extraordinary. It's worth it for me to come back to Liangzhu and spend a lot of money to exchange for this dragon kill from the revered elders of the secret palace. A deep dragon roar came out of Wu Qi's mouth, and then it went on, while faint black scales began to emerge from Wu Qi's skin. Standing in the great hall, Wu Qi kept pouring into his body from the surrounding natural energy and Panga's sacred energy, and gradually, gusts of chilly wind and ghost fire began to pour out of the ground and fuse into his body. After more than 2 hours, under the horrified gazes of the crowd, Wu Qi suddenly opened his eyes, from which 2 beams of blood-red light shot out. Ferocious and violent dragon roars kept ringing out of Wu Qi's mouth, and suddenly his skin was covered with 3 thick layers of black dragon scales. The scales exuded a strong murderous aura, while gusts of chilly wind and evil aura spewed out of every one of them. Amidst a series of cracking sounds, Wu Qi's body grew taller and taller. In just 10 minutes, Wu Qi's body had grown to about 30 feet tall. With a wave of his arms, dozens of black dragon shadows rushed out of Wu Qi's body. Shrouded in chilly wind and ghost fire, they pierced through the void and drilled countless bowl-sized holes in the void hundreds of feet around Wu Qi. These dragon shadows let out shrill cries, which contained a demonic sound that could shake one's soul. Terrible sound waves spread out in waves, causing King Yang Qiu and the many military officers standing in front of the throne to sway and nearly fall to the ground. Sticky black ghost fire spread out of Wu Qi's body, quickly enveloping him in a layer of ghost fire that was about 20 feet thick. This kind of ghost fire was the 9 nether ghost flame, condensed from the aura of the yellow spring and the boundless aura of death in the dragon kill. It was the filthiest and most vicious flame in the world. Not only did it have an incredible heat, but it was also good at polluting all souls, spirit bodies, and all kinds of magical artifacts. Apart from a few powerful immortal artifacts crafted with pure yang energy, all other immortal artifacts, even top-grade gold immortal artifacts, would immediately turn from dazzling immortal artifacts into pebbles in a latrine if they were touched by this 9 nether ghost flame. Even Yu Gu, who had been sitting calmly off to the side, could not help but rise to his feet in shock. Eyes wide, he stared at Wu Qi and cried out, "The 9 nether ghost flame. This is the first time you've cultivated the dragon kill, and yet you're able to conjure the strongest spell? Tan Lang, are you married? I have tens of thousands of granddaughters, great-granddaughters, and great-granddaughters. You can choose any one of them." Wu Qi laughed disapprovingly, then fixed his blood-red eyes at Yu Qingcheng, whose face was livid. "If she is old Mr. Yu Gu's daughter, I'm afraid she can only be my concubine," he said aloud. Tan Lang already has someone he loves. Was it really rare for him to be able to conjure the 9 nether ghost flame when he was cultivating the dragon kill for the first time? The chaotic energy in his body could transform into any energy in the world, so as long as he understood the dragon kill, he could cast any spell he wanted. In just over 2 hours, Wu Qi had completely mastered all the techniques of the dragon kill. He had even made some improvements to the evil dragon kill, making the secret technique several times more powerful and vicious. Even the defensive power of the humanoid dragon body he had condensed was much stronger. King Yang Qiu glared at Yu Gu angrily. "This is the first time I've cultivated the dragon kill, but Wu Qi has already made such an achievement. His value is more precious than any jade disc of Lian City. Junior, I wish I could throw all my sisters into Wu Qi's bed to win him over. Why are you here? Do you think Yu clan of Zhong province can recruit such a talent?" King Yang Qiu clapped his hands and said cheerfully, "Good, good, very good. The dragon kill is extremely powerful, and if I can master it, I will be able to challenge those who are several realms stronger than me. Tan Lang, work hard, and I'll reward you handsomely." If it were not for the fact that Wu Qi did not have any outstanding achievements at the moment, King Yang Qiu would have written a memorial to the human emperor to confer the title of Marquis to Wu Qi. But it did not matter. As long as the sovereign was killed, Wu Qi could share some of the credit with him, and that would be enough. While the group was commenting on Wu Qi's abnormal aptitude, Yang Qiu Yushi, who was in charge of the army outside, hurried in with a few generals. Dropping to one knee, Yang Qiu Yushi cried out in a loud voice, "Your Excellency, there is some movement outside the valley where the 2 worms are hiding. I'm afraid the sovereign has sent scouts." A cold gleam shot out of the eyes of the people in the hall at the same time. Without saying a word, King Yang Qiu strode out of the hall, followed closely by Wu Qi and the others. Just as they were about to leave the hall, Wu Qi suddenly turned to look at Yu Qingcheng. Yu Qingcheng was glaring fiercely at Wu Qi, and when he saw Wu Qi turn to look at him, he quickly squeezed out a smile. Wu Qi grinned and gave Yu Qingcheng the middle finger. Chapter 702. 17 pitch-black flagpoles were planted on the ground, each standing 120 feet tall and exuding a ghastly black mist. On top of the flagpoles were flags that were tens of feet long and embroidered with countless venomous insects. They remained motionless amidst the black mist, with faint gleams emanating from them. Standing in the middle of the flagpoles, Wu Qi and the others looked up at the faint gleams that formed a hazy curtain of light over their heads. It was the valley where the twin dragon pythons lived. At the moment, several strange-looking black-shelled insects were crawling about outside the valley. These insects looked similar to centipedes, with a natural eyeball pattern on their half-millimeter-long bodies. When they crawled, they leaped as if they were flying, and even the speed of ordinary heaven immortals could not catch up with them. These were the strange insects that the oracles of Dayu's Directorate of Celestials, who specialized in the art of poison, liked to keep. They were so gifted that their aura could fuse with the environment around them at any time. Unless one had cultivated a special divine ability to see them with the naked eye, only a top-notch primordial immortal or Buddhist ancestor could find them with divine sense. These insects were scattered around the valley, and everything they saw could be fed back to them through the specially refined eye-bug flag. It was the most amazing surveillance mystic art of the Directorate of Celestials. Generally speaking, unless the person being watched knew for sure that the eye bug was watching him and knew where the eye bug was hiding, even an ordinary primordial immortal might be exposed by these strange insects. In the valley, the twin sisters were yawning lazily in their ice and fire caves, back and forth in their true forms. Their translucent, fleshy wings drooped next to their bodies, fluttering casually as the fire and cold air surged. Occasionally, they would poke their heads out and rub against each other's bodies. The intimate and loving look on their face made Wu Qi smile. Suddenly, a few furtive shadows appeared outside the valley. These black shadows were like the shadows of people under the sun, flying close to the ground. They didn't make the slightest sound, and there wasn't the slightest leakage of spiritual power. These shadows were an extremely rare type of demon known as the shadow beasts who cultivated the immortal Tao. Their strength and status were low, and it was impossible for them to break through the realm of celestial immortals. But just like the eye worms, the shadow beasts were the favorite personal guards of powerful immortals who wielded heavy fists. They had a natural advantage when it came to spying and sending messages. Their escape technique was extremely fast. Although these shadow beasts were only at the level of 36th tier heaven immortals, their flying speed was comparable to that of a peak-grade gold immortal who was flying with the strongest escape technique. They did not have much fighting power, and their most famous divine abilities were their flying speed and their concealment skills. In just a few blinks of an eye, these shadow beasts had circled a few times around the valley where the two sisters were hiding, and even the valley where Wu Qi and his companions were hiding was visited by them. Fortunately, Wu Qi had deployed some small illusory formations outside the valley. These shadow beasts with low cultivation bases were confused by the illusions, and easily let go of the valley where a great danger was hidden. Not long after, the shadow beasts gathered together. They made hand gestures outside the valley and silently communicated for a while. Then, two of the shadow beasts quickly flew back the way they came. The other shadow beasts slowly sneaked into the valley, took out a large number of array flags and array discs, and carefully arranged a large array around the edge of the valley. Wu Qi recognized the formation. It was a trapping formation that could reverse the energy of 5 elements and seal off the underground energy veins and the void. It seemed that the sovereign was also afraid that the 2 dragon pythons would use their innate divine ability to escape through the void, so he had ordered his subordinates to deploy the formation here in advance. It also showed that the sovereign's injury was not light. Otherwise, with his cultivation base as a primordial immortal, even if he had just stepped into the realm of primordial immortal, he would not be afraid of these 2 dragon pythons who had yet to grow up. Primordial immortals possessed incredible divine abilities. If he were not seriously injured, and if he still had a small part of his divine ability and magic power left, the 2 sisters would not have been able to escape from him. While Wu Qi was pondering, King Yang Qiu laughed coldly and said, "It seems that the sovereign is seriously injured. He, although my father was injured by him with a secret artifact, my father had also joined hands with a few sinecures to severely injure him. If a primordial immortal is injured, it will not be as easy to heal as those low-grade immortals." Wu Qi nodded to himself. If a heaven immortal was injured, he would be able to recover by consuming a little bit of his energy, taking some pills, and then spending hundreds of years in seclusion. If a gold immortal was injured, he would need to spend years in seclusion to rebuild his energy, and once his energy was depleted, he would need to spend years in seclusion to restore his immortal body and immortal soul. If a gold immortal was injured, he would need to spend thousands or even tens of thousands of years in seclusion, taking supreme-grade immortal pills to fully restore his immortal body and immortal soul. If a primordial immortal was injured, it would be a big problem. Primordial immortals had fused their understanding of the laws of heaven and earth into their bodies, so every single hair on their body represented the essence of the great Tao they had comprehended. It was a complete and indispensable body. There were very few primordial immortals, and very few people could injure them. As primordial immortals, they would try their best to avoid any conflict with each other, so that their immortal body and immortal soul would not be harmed. Once a primordial immortal's immortal body and immortal soul were injured, the laws of heaven and earth they had comprehended would be incomplete, and it would take a primordial tribulation's worth of time to recomprehend and refuse each law into their bodies. If they were slightly injured, it would take them eons to slowly heal the injury. But if they were seriously injured, and the injury even affected their immortal soul, it would be a serious problem. For example, if the sovereign's immortal soul was injured, ordinary heaven immortals and gold immortals would be able to recover as soon as they went into seclusion. But, if a primordial immortal's immortal soul was injured, it could trigger a chain reaction between his immortal body and immortal soul, leading to the complete collapse and annihilation of both. King Yang Qiu and his father were able to plot against the sovereign and seriously injure him, forcing the sovereign to offer an astronomical reward for more than 100 kinds of life-saving spirit herbs. But, the alliance, as large as it was, could not gather all the spirit herbs it needed. Perhaps King Yang Qiu and his father had done something behind the scenes, and it was very likely that all the spirit herbs that could not be collected had been looted by them through the official channels of Diyu. With the map of Pangu's mountains and river of the gods as a guide, it was actually very easy to plunder the best quality elixirs that were likely to be only 2 or 3 in a big province before the union of 10,000 immortals did. Just as Wu Qi was sighing with emotion at the means of King Yang Qiu and his father, a colorful light began to flicker on the light screen over his head. A ring of purple mist flew over from the sky, rising into the air and spreading out for hundreds of acres in area. Within the purple mist was a chariot that was pulled by a 3-headed crystal horse. The ancient-looking and heavy chariot was emitting a 4-colored light, which was red, blue, white, and yellow. The light shone out for tens of miles, making it extremely eye-catching. The 3 crystal heavenly horses pulling the chariot were tens of feet tall and hundreds of feet long, with a wingspan of more than 400 feet. Their entire bodies were translucent as if they were made of crystal. They were a rare species that only the celestial court kept in small numbers. Rumor had it that they had the bloodline of dragons, and each adult crystal heavenly horse had the overall strength of a high-level gold immortal. In addition to the 2 coachmen in long robes and tall crowns, there was a figure sitting behind the fluttering bead curtain. But, the curtain was strung with thumb-sized pearls of supreme grade, glinting with a white gleam that was as sharp as a knife. Even with the special ability of the eye bug, Wu Qi could not see through the curtain and see the face of the figure. On both sides of the chariot were 300 heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals clad in golden armors, mounted on dragon-scaled heavenly horses. Behind the chariot were 1,000 immortals clad in white immortal robes and white jade crowns. Amidst the dense purple mist, hundreds of figures could be vaguely seen, all shrouded in a purple-gold mist. Clearly, they were all gold immortals. Because of the purple mist, Wu Qi could not tell how many gold immortals were hiding in it. But, judging from the way the sovereign traveled, he could tell that there were quite a number of them. What an ostentatious show! King Yang Qiu laughed mockingly. The legendary sovereign keeps a low profile, and usually brings only 3 to 5 attendants with him when he travels. Why is he bringing more than 1,000 guards today? Could it be that he has been frightened by what happened last time? Yang Qiu Fengbue and the others laughed in unison. Setting up a trap and severely wounding the sovereign was something that His Highness was very proud of. Today, they were going to kill the sovereign in one fell swoop, taking advantage of the fact that the alliance was severely wounded. If he succeeded, King Yang Qiu was bound to be rewarded handsomely, and the status of these confidants around him would rise accordingly. Naturally, all of them would receive endless benefits. Therefore, the more gold immortals the sovereign brought with him, the better. Every gold immortal was a great contribution. In order to kill the sovereign, King Yang Qiu had mobilized all the elites under his command and spent so much manpower and resources. How could he let the sovereign escape? The chariot moved at an incredible speed. In just a few breaths of time, it had broken through hundreds of thousands of miles of thick clouds and arrived over the valley with an unstoppable momentum. Suddenly, a purple mist spread out in all directions, enveloping the valley within 100 miles in the blink of an eye. Then, a deep and powerful voice rang out, "Somebody, capture these two vile creatures alive and bring them back to make medicine for the sovereign." A war cry rang out, and dozens of golden-armored celestial soldiers and generals rushed out of the chariot. Riding on their dragon-scaled celestial horses, they charged toward the two sisters who were playing in the water and fire caves. A gust of wind kicked up, and bolts of lightning emerged out of thin air amidst the purple mist. One after another, the immortals cast their divine abilities and transformed into various celestial phenomena to cheer on the attacking celestial soldiers and generals. Startled, the sisters quickly coiled up their bodies, and the cold and fire energy in the water and fire caves quickly poured into their bodies. Then, they opened their mouths and shot out a blinding golden and silver light. At the same time, the dozen or so celestial soldiers and generals who were charging at the forefront raised the wrist shields on their left wrists and unleashed a thick light shield to protect themselves. A dull rumbling sound rang out as the shields of light shattered. The two sisters had easily killed off tens of heavenly soldiers and generals with the cultivation base of high-level heavenly immortals. Wu Qi clapped his hands and praised, "What a beautiful kill! Can it be any more beautiful?" King Yang Qiu and the other generals laughed in unison as they watched the tragic scene of the celestial soldiers falling to the ground through the light screen. Chapter 703. Then, a complacent laughter rang out from the chariot, "A beast will always be a beast. No matter how strong your cultivation base is, you are still a beast." Amidst the laughter, the purple mist condensed into a huge hand and reached down as fast as a bolt of lightning. Just then, Wu Qi broke through the dark clouds with the four Yang Qiu brothers and hundreds of King Yang Qiu's valiant generals, charging to the side of the sovereign's entourage of immortals. Wu Qi used the dragon kill mystic art, and his body swelled to 30 feet tall. 3 layers of black dragon scales covered his body, and black 9 nether ghost flames rolled around his body. He was like a human-shaped evil dragon as he charged into the ranks of the accompanying immortals. The purple qi around the carriage churned rapidly, clearly trying to protect the immortals accompanying it. But the unpredictable nature in the sky was too powerful, and the purple qi seemed to be running out of energy. The rain and hail pierced through the purple qi and fell on the immortals. Only the carriage, which was enveloped by the four-colored light, had an extremely strong defense. For now, nothing could get close to the carriage. 2 thick streams of cold light and fiery aura soared into the sky and enveloped the dragon pythons of fire and ice. The 2 dragon pythons twitched violently and let out a comfortable roar. Boundless cold energy and fire energy rushed into their bodies, helping them quickly expel the discomfort brought by the poison in their bodies. They were spirits condensed from the fire and water energies of heaven and earth. As long as they had enough fire and water energies, what did they have to fear? The sisters opened their mouths and took a deep breath. A strong gust of wind rolled up the dead bodies of the celestial soldiers, generals, and dragon horses, and sucked them into the sisters' mouths. They happily swallowed these trophies, letting out happy squeaks from time to time. Before he finished speaking, a large expanse of misty green hair shot out from behind a tall mountain. Everything in its path was crushed by the seemingly delicate green hair. It was unknown what kind of treasure this green silk was, but it directly covered the heads of Wu Qi and the others. Wu Qi was taken aback. Then, he saw the 2 dragon pythons in the light screen suddenly tremble. Their scales stood up, making their bodies seem 3 times thicker. Blood mixed with saliva kept dripping down from the corners of their mouths. A faint cold air was coming out of the golden dragon python, while wisps of flames were rising from the silver dragon python's body. Laughing evilly, Wuqi sent out 7 beams of dazzling black light from his 7 apertures, which spun and froze the head of a peak-level heaven immortal in front of him, pinning his immortal soul inside his body. Then, he reached out his hand and sent a dark ghost claw whistling down from the sky, splitting the heaven immortal's body into 6 pieces. Laughing strangely, Wuqi pointed at the chariot shrouded in purple mist and said, "Immortal Ding Jun, the sovereign of the myriad immortal alliance, prepare to die." Wuqi and the others were delighted to see this. The might of hundreds of celestial soldiers and generals was truly appalling, but it was so easily destroyed by the 2 dragon pythons of fire and ice. The cultivation bases of these 2 dragon pythons were truly frightening. Poor heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals who came with the sovereign. Their cultivation bases were not worth mentioning in front of these 2 ferocious beasts. Poison. Yugu narrowed his eyes and said, "It's poison. And it's a very strange poison." The golden dragon python's element is fire, and when she swallowed those corpses, the poison turned into cold in her body, while the silver dragon python's element is ice, and when she swallowed the corpses, they turned into flames. Ha ha, their attributes clash. These 2 worms are going to suffer. Amidst the flattery of the many immortals, a wild blood-red gleam flashed in the eyes of the 2 dragon pythons. Suddenly, the caves of ice and fire in the valley began to tremble. Amidst the terrified cries of the immortals, 2 streams of cold light, about a mile thick, rushed out of the caves, causing the ground to crack and crack one after another, and from the cracks rushed out boundless auras of water and fire. Seeing that they were about to be captured alive by the enemy, the 2 dragon pythons actually detonated the natural energy veins of fire and ice under the valley. King Yangqiu nodded slowly and said, "That's a good idea." Since the sovereign controls half of the pill workshops of the celestial court, it's not a big deal for him to mix up some poison. At this point, King Yangqiu suddenly grinned coldly and said, "Hehe, the sovereign of the myriad immortal alliance, Immortal Ding Jun, is actually the almighty immortal in charge of 50% of the pill workshops of the celestial court." Luckily, he didn't manage to gather those life-saving spirit herbs. The 2 dragon pythons of fire and ice joined their tails to form a perfectly round defensive formation. The endless cold and heat energy in the caves of water and fire poured into their bodies, and the cold light of flames rolled across them. Yin and yang coexisted with each other, and water and fire were compatible with each other. With the help of this peculiar landscape, the sisters had actually developed a strange defensive formation. Strong beams of gold and silver light swam around them like countless tiny flood dragons rolling in the ocean. The 4-colored light outside the chariot fluctuated rapidly, grinding away the incoming beams of gold and silver light like a millstone. But, the sisters hated the sovereign, who had attacked them in the chariot. So, they frantically extracted the aura of water and fire in the surroundings, without considering whether their bodies could withstand it or not. They kept transforming the aura of water and fire into the divine light of ice and fire, which then sprayed out in the form of strong beams of gold and silver light. A series of cracking noises rang out incessantly as hundreds of heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals were riddled with holes, their bodies spraying pale golden blood as they fell from the sky. The dragon-scaled heavenly horses they were mounted on also let out a miserable trumpet call. They flapped their wings with all their might, trying to fly again, but with hundreds of holes in their bodies, their vitality was rapidly fading away, and before long, they fell heavily to the ground. A large number of flowing runes emerged on the armor of the leading heavenly general, and a strong light enveloped him, turning him into a burning flame. Holding a 26-feet-long snake spear in his hand, he shot out tens of thousands of highly penetrating golden beams that rained down like a torrential rain. Blood splattered in all directions as Wu Qi and his companions caught these heaven immortals by surprise. With hundreds of gold immortals attacking more than 700 heaven immortals, the strongest among them was merely a peak-level heaven immortal. Wu Qi and his companions killed them as easily as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. Dark clouds covered the sky, but the thick clouds emitted a beautiful aurora that was 100 times more intense than the sunlight. A large area of halos rolled down from the sky, and threads of halos crossed the void. Of the 1,000 heaven immortals accompanying the chariot, more than 200 were swept into the aurora. Their immortal items and bodies melted silently, and in the blink of an eye, they were all turned into nothingness by the violent natural energy. Strange. Why did he send those people to their deaths? With his hands clasped behind his back, Yu Qingqing sneered and said, "What kind of person is the sovereign? Why would he do such an unwise thing?" When the heaven immortal soldiers and heavenly generals were less than 1,000 feet away from the sisters, they opened their mouths at the same time. Countless beams of gold and silver light shot out of their mouths, tearing through the void like a reverse meteor shower. Hundreds of heaven immortal soldiers and heavenly generals, who were protected by upper-grade heaven immortal artifacts, howled miserably. The divine light of ice and fire was good at destroying all weapons and magical artifacts, and the sudden change of temperature and cold was more than enough to destroy powerful gold immortal artifacts. Amidst King Yang Qiu's cold laughter, Wu Qi and his companions packed up their armors and weapons. Except for Wu Qi, the other generals checked their various spirit talismans, Yin thunders, and other offensive and defensive tools. After a simple but efficient check, they quickly left the valley and carefully made their way toward the valley where the dragon python sisters were. The friction between the ice and fire energy spewing out of the ground and the turbulent energy in the sky produced an aurora that killed 200 immortals like countless sharp blades. Dull thunderclaps rang out in the sky, followed by hailstones, fiery rain, frost, and gusts of wind falling from the sky. These were the unique natural phenomena of the primitive land, so even a drop of rain had a terrible lethality. The immortals accompanying the chariot were thrown into disarray, and countless immortals had to use their defensive immortal artifacts to hold on. As the ice and fire energy collided with each other, the two huge energy veins exploded as if they had gone berserk. A terrible force towered into the sky, sending mountains of ice and oceans of magma and fire flying into the sky, filling the sky with cold light and fire energy. The huge explosion dragged in all the energy veins tens of thousands of miles away. One after another, they exploded, causing a chilling chain reaction in the chaotic natural energy in the sky. Vast amounts of water and fire energy were being compressed crazily inside the two dragon pythons' bodies. Their eyes went wide as they fixed their eyes on the luxurious chariot. The fleshy wings on their backs flapped quickly, sending up monstrous flames and cold light. Suddenly, they let out shrill screams, and two strong beams of golden and silver light shot out of their mouths, smashing straight into the chariot. The two twisting and struggling dragon pythons raised their heads, blood and saliva dripping down from the corners of their mouths. They let out deep screams weakly, but they did not have the strength to do anything to the giant hand condensed from the purple mist. The big formation formed by the small shrubs around them lost control and could not play any defensive role. The big hand formed by the purple gas grabbed down, all the shrubs were broken, and the fruits on them all exploded into jam, splashing everywhere. The endless golden and silver light forced the chariot back step by step, and in the blink of an eye, it was pushed tens of thousands of feet away. When the golden light shot out by the heavenly generals hit the formation around the sisters, a series of explosions rang out, and the golden light was quickly extinguished. The power of water and fire devoured it, and the light around the sisters grew stronger and stronger. Their bodies were curled up, and their eyes were filled with a violent aura as they stared fixedly at the hundreds of heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals who were rushing down from above. Faint drops of cold air and flames were dripping down from the corners of their mouths. Above the valley, the heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals who came with the sovereign's chariot roared at the same time, scolding, "How dare you, evil creatures!" as they unleashed their divine abilities and magical powers and charged toward the sisters. The armors and weapons worn by these heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals were of the best quality, at least heaven immortal items. When they unleashed the full power of their immortal items, a golden light immediately lit up the entire valley. The two dragon pythons slowly flew up into the sky, their slender and beautiful bodies reflecting a colorful glow under the reflection of the purple mist and golden light, making them look extraordinarily beautiful. They twisted their bodies desperately, but the poison in their stomachs had messed up the circulation of their energy and blood, so much so that they could not even unleash the innate divine ability inherited from their bloodline. As their bodies flew up inch by inch, the miserable howls of the two dragon pythons grew sharper and louder, and there was a faint hint of madness in their howls. Inside the chariot, the sovereign did not strike again. The purple mist around the chariot rose and turned into a large cloud shaped like a Ganoderma, spinning rapidly as he passively defended himself. Even though the accompanying immortals were badly battered by the sudden outburst of natural energy, the sovereign did not make a move and did not respond to the sisters. The sisters threw their heads back and let out a long hiss, then shrunk their bodies and tried to hide in the ice and fire acupoints. But, the golden light fell like raindrops from the huge purple palm, while a strange suction force held their bodies down. How could they move freely? The many immortals standing around the chariot all exclaimed in unison, praising the sovereign for his incredible magical power and divine ability, and for his unpredictable ability. Chapter 704. The endless threads of green light sprinkled down gently, piercing everything they touched. The dark clouds in the sky, the thunderbolts, the hailstones under the thunderbolts, and the rocks under the hailstones were all pierced through. Just like the dark clouds, thunderbolts, hailstones, and rocks, the armors and bodies of Wu Qi and the others were pierced through. Severe pain came from every part of their bodies, making them howl and fall to the ground, twitching and twitching. Pagoda, rise! Wu Qi cried out. A tricolored pagoda rose into the sky from the top of his head, emanating a vast sheet of light that enveloped the surroundings. After fighting with the immortals for countless years, Dayu's Directorate of Celestials had figured out countless wonderful mystic arts, which allowed them to temporarily activate the immortal artifacts of immortals with the natural energy of heaven and earth. Unlike the immortals, who fused their immortal souls with their immortal artifacts, these mystic arts compressed the natural energy with hand incantations and spells, transforming it into something similar to the divine sense of immortals, then activated the various formations in the immortal artifacts and unleashed part of their power. Immortal artifacts had their own spirits, and their cultivation bases were extremely strong. Therefore, these mystic arts had to first suppress or obliterate their spirits before they could activate the immortal artifacts. In this way, the power of the immortal artifacts would be weakened by more than half. However, the oracles did not intend to unleash the full power of the immortal artifacts. They just wanted to activate them, and then, just like what Wu Qi was doing now, Wu Qi unleashed the pagoda he snatched from Li Qinghua, performed an incantation gesture with both hands, and pointed it at the pagoda. An invisible shockwave blasted out, and a miserable howl rang out from inside the pagoda as it exploded. The sky was filled with a strong tricolored light, which spread rapidly and turned into a sea of tricolored clouds that was 100 miles thick and 10,000 miles in circumference. Amidst the tricolored light, the overwhelming green threads that shot down from the sky gradually melted away, no longer emitting the terrible aura that could destroy everything. Yang Xiufengbua, whose body was riddled with countless tiny holes and whose skin was oozing with beads of blood, let out a long cry and thrust his claw forward. Purple mist rose from his fingertips, shattering the space within a radius of tens of meters. He grabbed the two struggling dragon boas, dragged them by their necks and brought them back to his side. Wu Qi quickly glanced at the two dragon pythons. The chaotic spiritual energy in his body surged and wrapped around the dragon python bloodline he obtained from Gold Horn and Silver Horn. A faint dragon python aura spread out from his body but disappeared in a flash. It was such a faint aura that Yang Xiufengbua and the other generals, whose souls were no stronger than those of ordinary people, did not notice anything unusual. The two dragon pythons, who had been spurting out dazzling beams from time to time, wisely shut their mouths and obediently shrunk their bodies to around a foot long. Then, they flew up from Yang Xiufengbua's hand and landed on Wu Qi's shoulder, wrapping their tails around Wu Qi's neck like two necklaces. With a smile on his face, Wu Qi gave the two dragon pythons a look and nodded. Then, he gave a long laugh, turned around, and left with the captains who also had their bodies riddled with holes. Each of these elite generals had a cultivation base above the second Panga heaven, and their overall strength was strong enough to fight against gold immortals. Although they did not know any divine abilities or magic, their strong fleshly bodies allowed them to fly, and their flying speed was not inferior to that of immortals. All of them were shrouded in a faint purple mist, and when they flew, they left behind trails of purple light that stretched for miles. They looked like a group of purple meteors streaking across the void with a mighty momentum. A violent cough came from afar. Behind the hill where the green light had shot out, a middle-aged Taoist in a moon-white Taoist robe with his hair hanging loosely over his shoulders, and a 2-inch-wide white ribbon tied around his forehead with a purple jade inlaid in the middle of it. The Taoist was holding a horsetail whisk that glowed with a green light, which was the manifestation of the green light that could destroy almost everything just now. With just a light blow, the strong fleshly bodies of Wu Qi and the others were riddled with holes like sieves. Fortunately, they had the protection of Panga's sacred qi. Although the penetrating power of the green light threads was extremely terrifying, the explosive power was not enough. Although they had dozens of holes in their bodies, the wounds were too small. After the purple qi circled around their bodies had already recovered. At most, they had lost a little primordial qi, but it was really not a serious injury. The middle-aged Taoist was the sovereign of the Myriad Immortal Alliance, Immortal Ding Jun of the Celestial Court, an important minister in charge of half of the alchemy workshops in the Celestial Court. He had a round face that was as fair as a silver basin, but now it was covered with a faint layer of gray mist, and there were some sweat and dirt that could not be concealed at the corners of his eyes and the tips of his brows. Although his primordial immortal body was unstained by dust, there were sweat and dirt on him, which showed that his immortal body was rapidly withering and aging. For a primordial immortal, this was a sign that both his immortal body and immortal soul were about to disintegrate. After coughing violently, the sovereign looked up at the three-colored light that was dispersing over his head and said in a flat voice, "You've got Huinghua? Are you luring the enemy by deliberately exploding this exquisite pagoda? Are you threatening me? Ha, why should I be afraid of you?" After laughing mysteriously, the sovereign suddenly cried out, "Wu Xing, you despicable man, hand over my son at once. These 2 dragon pythons are the medicinal ingredients I've ordered, so you'd better leave them here as well." With a loud laugh, a purple mist in the shape of a rui suddenly rose from the top of the sovereign's head, spreading and spreading for 100 miles around him. Suddenly, 3 jade lotus thrones shrouded in purple light slowly rose from the top. Among the 3 jade lotus thrones, one of them was supporting a ball of pale green flame, another was supporting a hazy pill cauldron that was emitting clouds in the shape of dragons and tigers, and the last one was sitting cross-legged on a 3 feet tall naked boy. However, blood continued to seep out of the boy's body, and the dragon-tiger-shaped clouds around the cauldron continued to shatter. The ball of light green flames was also scattered and deformed, and from time to time, wisps of flames would seep out. "You can't leave now." The sovereign beckoned at the chariot that was shrouded in purple mist. The bead curtain on the chariot was rolled to the side, revealing a human figure condensed from the purple mist. After that, the sovereign flew into the chariot and drove it to chase after Wu Qi and the others. The purple mist, which was 100 times stronger than before, enveloped the chariot. Amidst it, hundreds of gold immortals could be vaguely seen, and from time to time, the roars of all kinds of strange beasts could be heard rising into the sky. The chariot chased after Wu Qi and the others like a bolt of lightning. The 3 crystal Pegasi flapped their huge wings, and every time they flapped their wings, a huge hurricane would rise from the ground, bringing the chariot a few miles closer to Wu Qi and the others. In just the space of a few breaths, the chariot had caught up with Wu Qi and the others, and was now less than 1,000 feet away from them. A creepy laugh rang out as the sovereign narrowed his eyes and stretched out a claw. Instantly, the chaotic natural energy in the surroundings calmed down, and all the natural energy within 10,000 miles surged crazily toward his palm. Out of nowhere, a huge hand, several miles in circumference, shrouded in purple mist, quickly stretched out and grabbed toward Wu Qi and the others. As soon as the huge hand took shape, the flying speed of Wu Qi and the others suddenly slowed down by a few times, and their bodies flew uncontrollably toward it. Wu Qi felt that his body had fallen into a sticky, invisible force, and the pressure coming at him from all directions was extremely great. No matter how he mustered the chaotic energy in his body, no matter how he combined the true body of heaven and earth scripture, the dragon transformation script, and the dragon kill, he just could not break free from the pressure. The terrible pressure made his bones creak, and all his internal organs let out a sorrowful moan. Even though his immortal body and immortal soul had been severely wounded, the sovereign was still in existence that Wu Qi could not resist. He did not even use a little bit of his immortal energy. Relying entirely on his vast divine sense and his understanding of the laws of heaven and earth, he was able to manipulate the laws of heaven and earth with just a tiny bit of divine sense, and yet, he was able to unleash divine abilities and mystic arts that were even more powerful than those of top-grade gold immortals. This was the so-called, with a single thought, all things come into being. When one reached the realm of primordial immortals, every move one made contained the great Tao of heaven and earth. Thus, the sovereign's grab was like the entire world trying to capture Wu Qi and his companions. Unless they were strong enough to break free from the shackles of heaven and earth, they would not be able to escape from the sovereign's grasp. Yang Xiufengbue and the others were much stronger than Wu Qi. As mighty existences in the second Panga heaven, they were strong enough to fight against gold immortals. But, they were also caught by the sovereign's casual grab, their bodies flying uncontrollably toward the huge palm without any power to resist. There were even some generals who were weaker than Wu Qi. Although their fleshly bodies were strong, they did not cultivate divine abilities or magic power. As a result, the wisp of the laws of heaven contained in the huge palm had wounded their fleshly bodies and souls. Blood kept gushing out of their 7 orifices, and it looked like they were about to be crushed to death by the pressure. Wu Qi took a deep breath and cried out, "Brothers, what are you waiting for?" With great difficulty, he flicked his finger and threw out a small triangular black flag the size of a palm, which swayed in the air and expanded into a large flag about 1,000 feet in circumference. With great difficulty, the 4 Yang Qiu brothers also threw out 4 smaller flags of the same pattern. As the flags fluttered in the air, shrill ghost howls could be heard coming from them, while 5 dark torrents poured out of them at top speed, accompanied by terrible whistling noises. The myriad Gu rotting flags were a vicious magical artifact crafted by Yu Gu. Each flag contained a void of its own, in which countless poisonous insects and venomous rotting corpses were devouring and killing each other. Every year, countless fresh venomous insects and rotting corpses would be added to the flags. After being refined by Yu Gu for tens of thousands of years, the poison contained in the 5 flags, as well as the various poisonous creatures they bred, had reached an unimaginable level. The dark torrents were a mixture of rotting corpses and the venom of all kinds of venomous insects, stinking, filthy, and containing terrible toxicity. The torrents poured down on the sovereign's huge palm, producing a shrill screech that sounded like ice water colliding with a red-hot iron plate. As the purple palm continued to melt and corrode, the sovereign's body swayed. Suddenly, a line of blood trickled down the corner of his mouth, and a wisp of black smoke appeared on his face. Yu Gu was, after all, a supreme oracle who was strong enough to fight against a primordial immortal, and the vicious magical artifact he crafted was so powerful that the sovereign's aura had merely touched the torrents, but the venom had already broken through the void and rushed into his fleshly body. With a bizarre smile on his face, the huge purple palm above him suddenly dissipated. Coughing up a mouthful of stinking blood, the sovereign cried out, "What a despicable trick! Hee hee, why don't you give me back my son? Hurry up and hand over those 2 long worms." With this buffer, Wu Qi and the others had already rushed to the valley where the black spirit seizing energy was hidden. Without hesitation, they plunged into the valley and quickly disappeared in the dense black smoke. A deafening rumble rang out as dozens of flags soared into the sky from the valley. As they rolled, countless wisps of black smoke rose from them. Clearly, a vicious array had been laid out in the valley. Looking at the valley, then at the nearby hills and valleys, as well as the lofty mountains on the side, the sovereign smiled mysteriously again. With a cold snort, he drove the chariot and followed Wu Qi and the others into the valley without hesitation. What a petty trick! Do you think I'm afraid of you villains? A thunderclap rang out of the chariot as the sovereign threw out an ordinary-looking palm thunderbolt, which swept across thousands of miles and shattered dozens of banners in the valley, exposing Wu Qi and the others in front of him in an instant. Chapter 705. A raging hot wind mixed with stray electric currents swept across Wu Qi's scalp, causing his hair to stand up one by one. The atmosphere was filled with electric charges, causing his hair to crackle and flicker with tiny electric currents. Yang Xiufengbue and the others were in the same situation. Their bodies were shrouded in a faint layer of electric currents, and they were all dumbfounded as if they had just seen a ghost. The valley was only a part of Wu Qi's plan as a bait, a little trick to fool the eyes and ears. His goal was to lure the sovereign to the myriad poisons formation he had set up in a hilly area nearby. But, never in his wildest dreams did he expect that all the arrangements in the valley would be shattered by the sovereign's palm thunder. Even though it was just a bait, the valley was carefully constructed with 3 layers of nested large-scale formations. Even though the sovereign was a primordial immortal, Wu Qi thought he could at least cause him some trouble. In Wu Qi's opinion, the sovereign would not be able to get out of the valley without a quarter of an hour's time. But, the sovereign's palm thunder had shattered all the arrangements in the valley, along with the 2,700 soldiers who were responsible for controlling the formation flags and all the arrangements in the formation. 3 sets of nested array diagrams, hundreds of array discs of different sizes, and vital energy that were connected to 6 underground spirit veins as energy supply, as well as 2,700 heaven immortal soldiers controlling the array, were all shattered by a single palm thunder. It was the most ordinary palm thunder, a palm thunder that could be cultivated by any cultivator who had made some achievements in the Jin Dan realm. It was the most basic magic of immortal cultivators, and yet, it had completely destroyed the formation that Wu Qi had meticulously constructed with just one strike. Just now, when the sovereign raised his hand and unleashed the palm thunder, Wu Qi sensed the strange changes in the surrounding void with his divine sense. The lightning bolt that shot out of the sovereign's palm was as thin as a strand of hair, no more than a foot long. However, it contained an indescribable, marvelous rhythm. When it shot out, all the energy in the surroundings underwent a fundamental change. All the natural energy was transformed into surging lightning, and then quickly gathered toward the lightning bolt. In the blink of an eye, all the heaven and earth spiritual chi in a radius of 10,000 miles had been attached to that bolt of lightning, turning into a terrifying thunderstorm. The sovereign had only thrown out a tiny seed, but in that instant, it had grown into a towering tree, which had unleashed an incredible and terrible power. The 1,000-mile-long valley, the 3 sets of nested formations, and so many soldiers who were controlling the formations, were all turned into nothingness by a single thunderbolt. Although crafty plots and schemes are useful, they can never be used in public. Sitting in the chariot, the sovereign lifted the bead curtain in front of him and stared coldly at Wu Qi. I have long expected that this journey will be full of troubles. That's why I asked the empty chariot to move forward while I stayed behind to see who is trying to make things difficult for me. With a faint sigh, the sovereign narrowed his eyes and said coolly, So, it's an old friend who is trying to kill me, isn't it? Wu Qi chuckled. The chaotic energy in his body kept rolling and swelling as the chaotic natural energy in the surroundings and the purple energy under the ground rushed into him. His body abruptly grew from 30 feet tall to about 50 feet. Muscles bulged all over his body, and black dragon scales stood up one after another like sharp blades. Amidst his heavy breathing, Wu Qi exhaled like a dragon. Streams of black airflow swirled around him like living flood dragons. Clenching his fists, Wu Qi sneered at the sovereign and said, As long as the sovereign is alive, His Highness will never be at ease. If His Highness is dead, the contribution we have made will be enough for all of us brothers to be conferred marquises, right? Chuckling, Wu Qi nodded at the sovereign and said, By the way, we have also captured your son, Li Qinghua, which is a great contribution as well. The sovereign sighed, a little dispirited, then shook his head and said, You want to kill me? Do you think you can get the credit? Wu Qi gave a cold snort. He was worried as well. He had expected that the formation he had laid out could hold the sovereign for at least a quarter of an hour with the help of the natural power of the dark energy in the valley. A quarter of an hour later, he would lure the sovereign to another place that he had prepared in advance, a flat piece of land to the left of the valley where a teleportation formation had been laid out, which would transfer all of them into the myriad poisons formation. First, he would use a small formation to lure the enemy and make them arrogant, and then, he would use the myriad poisons formation to attack the enemy head-on. While the enemy was arrogant and careless, he would first eliminate a group of gold immortals around the sovereign and weaken the enemy's strength. After that, he would focus all his efforts on trapping the sovereign with the myriad poisons formation. Wu Qi had carefully weighed all these steps in his mind, but he did not expect that the sovereign's overall strength, the overall strength of a primordial immortal, had far exceeded his expectation. With just a palm strike, the sovereign had shattered the formation in the valley. How was he going to lure the enemy? How was he going to lure the enemy? Schemes and tricks were useless in the face of absolute strength. With a wry smile, Wu Qi pointed to the complex terrain of hills and valleys next to the valley and said, "Sovereign, His Highness is waiting for you in that formation. If you can enter the formation and break it, we'll offer young Master Li Qinghua and the 2 dragon pythons to you. If you can't break the formation, then..." Wu Qi purposely did not finish his words. He just let out a few gloomy, cold laughs. The sovereign looked thoughtfully at the hilly area and said in a flat voice, "Is the King Yang Qiu you mentioned King Yang Qiu or that old villain King Yang Shan?" When the 4 young Qiufengbo brothers heard the sovereign insult their master, they roared at the same time, "How dare you! Shut up!" The sovereign shook his head and snorted softly. Immediately, a thunderclap rang out in the 4 brothers' ears. Their eyes widened abruptly, and all the capillaries in their eyes broke. Blood gushed out of their eyes, and soon, blood was pouring out of their 7 orifices. However, the sovereign's soft snort turned into countless thunderbolts that exploded in the 4 brothers' spiritual oceans, nearly shattering their souls. Fortunately, Wu Qi reacted quickly. He quickly produced 4 bone talismans, crushed them, and smashed them on the back of the 4 brothers' heads. Then, he punched them with both hands and quickly sent a stream of purple energy into their bodies. The 4 bone talismans were made by powerful oracles from the Directorate of Celestials, and they had the effect of stabilizing one's mind and soul and expelling evil spirits. As soon as the spirit light rushed into the 4 brothers' spiritual oceans, the thunderclaps were quickly dispelled and their souls were stabilized. Meanwhile, the purple energy that Wu Qi sent into their bodies quickly repaired their broken capillaries in their brains. Having escaped death with great difficulty, the 4 brothers gave the sovereign a look of horror and took a few steps back subconsciously. Grabbing Wu Qi's hand, Yang Qiufengbo gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "My good brother, we owe you one. Damn it, this old evil Daoist's cultivation base is simply..." Wu Qi looked helplessly at the sovereign as well. The gap between their cultivation bases was just too huge. It was unimaginably huge. Gritting his teeth, Wu Qi suddenly threw his head back and gave a long cry into the sky. "Listen up, Your Highness. Castrate Li Qinghua and throw him to me, so that the sovereign can have a good look at what his future grandchildren look like." As soon as Wu Qi gave a long cry, King Yang Qiu's cold snort came out of the myriad poisons formation, "As you said. Well, should I cut him off or slice him into pieces?" A shrill scream came from afar, and then Li Qinghua howled at the top of his voice, "Dad, help me. They are taking off my pants." The sovereign's face twitched violently, and then turned livid. "How dare you! How shameless!" he roared at the top of his voice. "What a formation you are! Here I come. King Yang Qiu, you are even more despicable, filthy, and despicable than your father. I'm going to cut you into 1,000 pieces, grind your bones, and scatter your ashes." Pointing a finger at Wu Qi, the sovereign snapped, "Lead the way, boy. After I break your formation, I'll cut you into pieces and send your soul into transmigration, so that you can be reincarnated as a woman and suffer endless humiliation in a brothel for the rest of your life." The sovereign's threat was so powerful that Wu Qi could not help but shudder and look at the sovereign with a strange look in his eyes. Not only could he send a man's soul into transmigration, but he could also control the appearance of his enemy's future reincarnation. Was the cultivation base of a primordial immortal really so heaven-defying? The 6 paths of reincarnation was a law controlled by the heavenly Tao. Could it have become the sovereign's private property? Unless... Wu Qi suddenly thought of the melodious chanting. Grinning coldly, Wu Qi, maintaining his 50 feet tall dragon-man form, strode toward the myriad poisons formation with the sovereign and his companions. Yang Qiufungbua and the others exchanged a glance. Laughing strangely, they soared into the sky and quickly disappeared into the formation. Although the myriad poisons formation was very powerful, its vital parts still needed to be guarded by experts. Otherwise, its foundation could be easily shaken by others. As soon as they entered the formation, they saw countless extremely thin streams of colorful mist rising from every mountain and valley, transforming into an extremely thin layer of colorful mist that firmly enveloped the hills within a radius of thousands of miles. The sovereign laughed mockingly. A formation that covers 1,000 miles? Ha, what is this? Have you ever seen an ancient formation like the one from the celestial court that covers an entire world? What is a mere formation that covers 1,000 miles? Wu Qi looked over his shoulder at the sovereign and said coolly, a formation does not have to cover a large area. As long as it can kill people, it is a good formation. What do you think? Gently patting the dragon python sisters, who were coiled around his neck, Wu Qi smiled at the sovereign and quickly disappeared into the formation. Sitting in the chariot, the sovereign looked up at the sky with a complicated expression, then glanced around. Finally, he looked at the formation that was shrouded in colorful smoke and murmured, well, it's not bad to be a Buddha of the Buddhist League. I've studied the immortal Tao for countless eons, but now I have to cultivate the Buddhist Dharma from the beginning. Never mind, never mind. At least, the Lord Buddha has promised me that I'll stay alive in this catastrophe and protect all my family members. What else can I ask for? Grinning coldly, the sovereign's chariot sped into the formation. Hundreds of gold immortals in the purple mist cried out at the same time as they followed the chariot into the formation. The roars of venomous insects and beasts could be heard coming from within the formation, and a plume of colorful smoke rose high into the sky. The entire formation was fully activated, and before long, the miserable howls of people dying could be heard coming from within. Chapter 706. As soon as the chariot entered the formation, the purple mist dissipated, revealing more than 300 immortals from myriad immortal alliance, clad in purple robes, and 30 or so strangely dressed youths. Needless to say, these immortals were the elites brought here by the sovereign, and they were almost half the number of gold immortals the alliance had recruited. As for those strangely dressed youths, no one knew where they came from. These youths were tall and strong, and their bulging muscles were full of strength. However, their bodies were not as heavy and cumbersome as Fan Yuqi and Fan Kuai, whom Wu Qi knew. Instead, they gave off a feeling of vigor, agility, and agility. Their hair was of different colors, purple, blue, red, white, silver, and many others, and all of them had waist-length hair that hung loosely behind their backs. The style of their robes was ancient, and the lines seemed very simple. However, the simple lines revealed an indescribable noble and dignified aura. They were handsome, and their eyes were filled with a natural nobility and pride. When they raised their heads slightly to look down at the crowd, they looked like gods looking down at the mortals from the clouds. They were outstanding young men, but their overall strength was really weak. As soon as they entered the formation, the sovereign drove the chariot and chased after Wu Qi. Behind the chariot, more than 30 black flood dragons rose into the sky, their bodies emanating a strong black smoke and a pungent stench. They sprayed out a great amount of venomous liquid to separate the immortals from the sovereign's chariot. The gold immortals bellowed, waved their hands, and unleashed dazzling sword beams that stretched for miles across the void toward the flood dragons. The black venomous liquid splashed on the sword beams unleashed by the gold immortals. Amidst a sizzling noise of corrosion, the sword beams quickly dimmed, and the halos on the surface of many cracked. The venomous liquid touched the flying swords, corroding them and leaving pits of various sizes on them. In just a few seconds, a deafening rumble echoed out as dozens of immortal swords exploded at the same time, turning into countless specks of light that drifted down from the sky. These flood dragons were vicious creatures that Yugu had spent a great deal of effort to cultivate. They were no longer living creatures, but bizarre existences between ghosts and zombies. What they usually devoured were carefully concocted venoms and poisons, and Yugu had been refining them with all kinds of vicious magic. The venom stored in their bodies would give even a primordial immortal a headache, let alone these gold immortals. After all, Yugu was a supreme oracle, and all his tricks were based on primordial immortals. Fighting against gold immortals was just a piece of cake. The WIRMS managed to stop the gold immortals for a moment. Next, clouds of smoke surged out from the 49 mountains down below to rapidly charge into the ranks of the gold immortals. The void around them twisted, and dozens of colorful flags fluttered in the air. Amidst the spinning of heaven and earth, all the gold immortals and the youths in quaint outfits were thrown randomly into various vicious killing formations within the myriad poisons formation. Of course, those gold immortals were not bothered with them. Naturally, the experts led by young Xiu Fengbo would deal with them with the help of the formation. As a result, these youths were thrown into the valley in the center of the formation. Then, a dull drumming echoed out, and hundreds of thousands of arrows wrapped in black flames came whistling toward the youths from all directions, leaving trails of black smoke that stretched for miles behind. These bolts were the venomous flying centipede crossbows recorded in the myriad poisons formation provided by Wu Qi. They were made by collecting all kinds of poisonous centipedes, collecting their venom and essence, and then refining them with ghost flame. Then, they were added with all kinds of vicious talismans and restrictive spells. With just a tiny bit of energy injected into the bolts, they could fly for days without falling. The flames on the arrows were poisonous centipede flames, and each wisp of them was equivalent to the venom of tens of thousands of poisonous centipedes. If the flames accidentally invaded one's body, even a gold immortal would have his or her limbs mutilated. On top of that, these crossbows were carefully crafted by the expert craftsmen provided by King Yangqiu, using the top-notch forging technique used by the Yu's military majesty in crafting all kinds of armaments. They were made of 36 different alloys, which made them so sharp that they could pierce through the defenses of immortal artifacts. Coupled with all kinds of runes personally inscribed on them by Yugu's sun oracles to increase their speed and penetrative power, the power of these crossbows was simply amazing. The group of 20 youths watched helplessly as countless crossbows came flying at them from all directions. All they could do was scream in horror, unable to do anything. The arrows pierced through their bodies with shrill whistling sounds. One arrow after another pierced through their bodies. The poison wreaked havoc in their bodies, and the flames burned in their bodies. Their skin gradually turned dark green. These young men let out shrill screams, and not long after, they died tragically under the barrage of crossbow bolts. The general who was in charge of controlling the formation flew up into the sky from behind a mountain, stepping on a poisonous cloud. Looking disdainfully at the youths who had died, he shook his head and said with a sneer, "How dare they come here to court death with myriad immortal alliance when they don't even have the cultivation base of heaven immortals? Are these people out of their minds?" The poison on the crossbows was so vicious that the bodies of the youths began to rot and dissolve as soon as they touched the ground. Even their bones were quickly corroded by the venom, and only their teeth, the toughest part of their bodies, barely remained intact. No one cared about the lives of these youths, so no one noticed that the teeth left on their bodies did not look like those of humans, but were extremely long and sharp, like those of beasts. If an experienced oracle of Deyu were to examine these bodies, he would be surprised to find that their teeth were almost identical to those of divine beasts such as white tiger and black tortoise. There were even some youths who did not leave any trace. After they fell to the ground, their bodies quickly rotted and dissolved, and then wisps of pure energy began to flow out of their bodies. Crystal cores the size of fists began to disintegrate, and some runes that represented the laws of heaven and earth began to crack, turning into natural energy and returning to heaven and earth. No one cared about the lives of these youths with low cultivation bases, and naturally, no one could think of what it meant for them to die here. The various vicious ambushes and restrictive spells in the myriad poisons formation were activated at the same time. Coordinating with the formation, Yang Xiufengbua and the others attacked from all directions, besieging the hundreds of gold immortals brought here by the sovereign. The power of the myriad poisons formation was so great that no matter how hard the gold immortals fought, they were faced with endless poisonous creatures and all kinds of unimaginably vicious restrictive spells. Their immortal energy was constantly being consumed, and their defensive immortal artifacts were gradually being eroded by all kinds of venomous liquids and gases, causing their strength to gradually decline. Wu Qi had transformed into a 50 feet tall dragon man and was running at top speed inside the formation, leading the sovereign and his chariot to the heart of the formation. Two lofty mountains stood at the entrance to the valley, one on the left and the other on the right. Huge flagpoles and flags could be seen fluttering on the peaks of the mountains. On the flagpole on the left, there were more than 30 ferocious and ugly crimson flame snakes coiled around it. On the flagpole on the right, there were thousands of thumb-sized turquoise coral sea spiders crawling on it. Over his shoulder, Wu Qi beckoned to the sovereign, who was sitting in the chariot, and said with a loud laugh, "Come in if you have the guts, old Taoist." Laughing wildly, Wu Qi's body flickered and plunged into the valley. The sovereign let out a strange laugh and drove the chariot into the valley. He did not care how the formation around him was changing, that the colorful poisonous smoke had sealed off the entire place, and did not even bother to look at the countless runes of various sizes that the smoke had condensed into. Laughing wildly, he drove the chariot straight into the valley, chasing after Wu Qi. "Hand over my son and the two dragon pythons." The sovereign roared with laughter. With a flick of the horsetail whisk in his hand, countless green threads shot out and turned into a surging green torrent that swept toward Wu Qi. Wu Qi's body froze abruptly. When the sovereign's horsetail whisk swept out, the void around Wu Qi suddenly froze. The void was sealed, and he could no longer move. In a moment of desperation, Wu Qi threw his head back and let out a long roar. The black nine-nether ghost flame around him soared hundreds of feet into the sky, while his body swelled once again, and the black dragon scales on his body became thicker and thicker. Then, he raised both arms and swung them. Amidst a crisp cracking sound, the void hundreds of feet around Wu Qi was suddenly torn open with white cracks that could be seen with the naked eye. A blinding light burst out of the white cracks as Wu Qi shook his body with all his might. A terrible force gradually shattered the void, and strange spatial energy poured out of the barrier, turning into countless dimensional blades that shot out in all directions. The green torrent unleashed by the sovereign was slashed by tens of thousands of dimensional blades. Countless green threads were cut off, turning into a rain of green light that rained down in all directions. In the sky, Yugu's supreme tower quietly appeared. Standing on the top of the tower, King Yang Qiu, Yugu, and Yu Qingsheng looked down at Wu Qi, who was luring the enemy deep into the valley. King Yang Qiu's face was filled with wild joy when he saw that Wu Qi was able to shatter the void sealed by the sovereign. Yugu's brows were twitching as he kept counting how many beautiful daughters and granddaughters he had who were not married yet. Yu Qingsheng, on the other hand, stared fixedly at Wu Qi with a cold gleam in his eyes as if he had seen a ghost. Accompanied by a crisp cracking sound, Wu Qi walked step by step through the shattered void. The dimensional blades had torn his dragon scales, skin, muscles, and bones. But, with the powerful effect of the true body of heaven and earth scripture and the dragon transformation script, Wu Qi's wounds healed rapidly. Gritting his teeth, he strode forward. Suddenly, he threw his head back and roared, "Lend me a hand, Lei Meng." The pill cauldron perched on the lotus throne over the sovereign's head shot out a beam of purple smoke in the shape of a dragon and a tiger, grabbing toward Wu Qi. Meanwhile, Yugu drove the supreme tower and smashed it down. In the sky, 100-mile-wide area of space suddenly shattered. A dense thundercloud rushed out of it, and 100-mile-tall, enormous hazy silhouette slowly emerged along with a muffled rumble of thunder. The hazy silhouette was covered in dazzling lightning bolts. Yu Qingqing moved his finger slightly, and a jade slip broke at his fingertip. A treacherous gleam flashed across his eyes. Some of the tricks he had prepared beforehand were more than enough to make Wu Qi suffer. But, Yu Qingqing's smile suddenly froze. Unhindered by anything, the Supreme Tower smashed onto the sovereign's chariot and smashed it to pieces. Countless streams of poisonous gas whistled through the air and smoothly squeezed into the sovereign's 7 orifices. His body abruptly took on a colorful hue, making him look like a human-shaped serpent, which made him look very terrifying. Lei Meng, the ghost deity whom Wu Qi had summoned, spun and turned into a bolt of lightning as thick as a water tank, smashing down from above. The flame, the pill cauldron, and the little boy were all torn to pieces by the lightning bolt. The sovereign howled miserably as blood sprayed out of his body, which had turned a mixture of 7 colors. A cold gleam flashed in King Yangqiu's eyes. All of a sudden, he leaped down from the sky and thrust his sword into the sovereign's forehead. The sovereign roared as his immortal body suddenly exploded, and a beam of spirit light shrouded in purple smoke soared into the sky from within. The sovereign's immortal body was destroyed, and his immortal soul was fleeing in panic. Chapter 707. Wu Qi stood rooted to the spot, allowing the blades to hack and slash at him, bringing up large chunks of flesh and blood. King Yangqiu stood rooted to the spot, staring blankly at the immortal soul that soared into the sky with purple mist swirling around it. The sovereign of the Myriad Immortal Alliance, Immortal Ding Jun of the Celestial Court, an important official who controlled half of the alchemy workshops of the Celestial Court, was killed so easily. Yu Gu was struck dumb as well. Even though the sovereign was severely wounded, and his immortal body and immortal soul were severely damaged, he was still a mighty primordial immortal. Even if he was on his last breath, he was not someone who could be easily dealt with. In order to guard against the sovereign's desperate attack, Yu Gu had taken out all his belongings, including the few secret treasures left behind by the ancestors of the Yu clan in Liangzhu. All he had to do now was to fight the sovereign to see who was stronger. But, he was killed just like that. His immortal body had disintegrated, and only his immortal soul had escaped. All 3 of them were stunned, but Yu Qingqing reacted quickly. He pointed at the sovereign's immortal soul and cried out. A beam of jade-colored light rushed out of the top of his head, transforming into 4 large hands that grabbed a huge net and flew toward the sovereign's immortal soul. Yu Qingqing's mentality changed in an instant. In order to embarrass Wu Qi and make him fall out of favor with King Yangqiu, he could not let Wu Qi complete the great merit of killing the sovereign. Therefore, he had prepared a lot of preemptive measures to ruin Wu Qi's plan. But, it was one thing to set the sovereign free in advance, and it was another to kill him so easily with his immortal body shattered, leaving only his immortal soul to escape. By killing the sovereign's immortal body, which was only a wisp of his immortal soul, he had already accomplished most of the merit. A primordial immortal's immortal body could only be formed after countless eons of careful tempering and polishing. Unless the sovereign's immortal soul could find a primordial corpse to possess in a short period of time, there was no way he could cultivate his immortal soul again. The laws of the Great Path contained in his immortal soul were so powerful that ordinary bodies and spirit treasures could not contain his immortal soul. Therefore, when the sovereign's immortal body disintegrated, he had lost 80% of his cultivation base. Even though there was only a wisp of his immortal soul left, it could not stir up any great waves. In the future, he could only hide in some spirit cave where he could gather energy and cultivate bitterly, spending countless eons to rebuild his immortal body. But, after countless eons, when he was lucky enough to recultivate his immortal body, it would be too late. By then, what use would he be as the sovereign of the Myriad Immortal Alliance? Now that Wu Qi had taken 80% of the credit, all of Yu Qingqing's ambushes had become a joke, and Wu Qi had firmly grasped the credit. In that case, Yu Qingqing naturally had to put on a good show. By capturing the sovereign's immortal soul alive, he would be able to claim a great credit, wouldn't he? The net was shrouded in a faint black smoke and evil aura, with countless ghost heads dancing in it. It was the 9 Suns and Mother Ean's soul net, which Yu Qingqing had refined by combining the magic of the immortal Tao and the divine ability of the ghost Tao of the Directorate of Celestials. It was especially good at restraining the souls and all spirit bodies of immortals. The net was extremely filthy, and if an immortal soul was caught in it, it would be like a puddle of water falling into a latrine pit, and its overall strength would be reduced by half. Yu Qingqing alone could not refine the 9 Suns and Mother Ean's soul net to such a great extent. But, as a direct descendant of the Yu clan in Liangzhu, he also had a powerful elder as his backer. The net was a domineering magical artifact that 9 elders of the Yu clan had spent 49 years refining for him. It was so powerful that it posed a great threat to the sovereign's immortal soul. As soon as the gray net appeared, the heaven and earth darkened. Activate the formation. Don't let his soul escape. Yu Qingqing shouted, gesticulating. At this point, everything Yu Qingqing had arranged was useless against Wu Qi, so he could only go with the flow and claim a share of the credit himself. Therefore, he was more proactive than anyone else, fearing that the sovereign's immortal soul would escape. If that happened, he would have nothing to gain. As soon as the 9 Suns and Mother Ean's soul net spread out, it expanded into a net that covered 1,000 miles in circumference and loomed over the sovereign. A foul stench filled the air, and from time to time, some unknown foul-smelling liquid dripped from the threads of the net. Coupled with the ghost heads and chilly winds that filled the sky, the net was truly a vicious magical artifact. When the sovereign's immortal soul, which was shrouded in purple mist, saw that the net was about to fall on him, he spun around and flew to the side. Wu Qi gave a cold snort. With a violent shake of his body, he shattered the void around him, then transformed into a dragon-shaped beam of black light and soared into the sky. Sovereign, since you're already here, we might as well take things as they come. Leave your immortal soul here. We still have a lot of things to interrogate you about. With a strange laugh, Wu Qi gritted his teeth and said, as the supervisor of the Celestial Court's pill workshops, you should at least leave me all the pill recipes of the Celestial Court that you remember. King Yang Qiu and Yu Gu's eyes gleamed coldly at the same time. Pill recipes of the Celestial Court. Both men cried out in unison and transformed into dazzling beams of light that towered into the sky. Pu Lao's beast soul flew out from the top of King Yang Qiu's head. As he let out a furious roar, the surrounding void vibrated, and the void within 100 miles exploded with a deafening boom. Countless spatial fragments shot out in all directions, forcing the sovereign's immortal soul to twist and struggle in the midst of the spatial fragments, lest it be sucked into the disintegrating void. Yu Gu, on the other hand, let out a long cry. His supreme tower soared into the sky, with countless runes flashing at the base of the tower at the same time. Countless wisps of black smoke shot out from the base of the tower like poisonous snakes, reaching out toward the sovereign's immortal soul in an overwhelming manner. For a moment, with the 9 Suns and Mother Ean's spirit net sealing off the sky, King Yang Qiu's roar shattering the void, Yu Gu's supreme tower emanating black smoke that filled the air, and Wu Qi flying through the void like a dragon, the sovereign was forced into a dead end. With a furious roar, a plume of purple smoke suddenly sprayed out of the sovereign's hazy immortal soul, which quickly transformed into a jade rui scepter that measured tens of miles in length. Shrouded in a vast expanse of golden light, it smashed toward the 9 Suns and Mother Ean's spirit net. It was a jade rui scepter condensed from the essence power of the sovereign's immortal soul, and it was cast with the supreme divine ability of the immortal Tao, the pure yang mystic art. The golden light swirling around it was 10,000 times hotter than the sun. As soon as the jade rui scepter appeared, Wu Qi, King Yang Qiu, and Yu Gu hurriedly retreated. Yu Qingqing's cultivation base was not very strong, so he could not control the 9 Suns and Mother Ean's spirit net at will, a magical artifact whose power far exceeded his cultivation base. As a result, he could only send it out, but could not retract it. Seeing that the situation was not good, Wu Qi and the others quickly dodged, but the 9 Suns and Mother Ean's spirit net fell heavily and collided with the jade rui scepter. Countless miserable howls echoed out as the jade rui scepter transformed into plumes of purple mist and drifted away. Amidst Wu Qi's gloating laughter, the nine-child mother-Yin's spirit net was burned with countless holes, turning into streams of stinking mucus that fell from the sky. The magical artifact, which Yu Qingqing had spent all his wealth and countless energy begging the elders of the Yu clan in Liangzhu to craft for him for 49 years, was turned into nothingness by the sovereign's desperate blow. Yu Qingqing trembled violently, and blood kept gushing out of his mouth. Wu Qi's laughter pounded on his heart like countless heavy hammers. Yu Qingqing felt both heartache and anger, and his vision darkened and he nearly fainted. He pointed a finger at Wu Qi in exasperation, wishing he could open his mouth and swallow Wu Qi alive. The sovereign's immortal soul swayed a little, then slowly flew up into the sky. Laughing strangely, Wu Qi came next to the sovereign's immortal soul with a blink of an eye and grabbed it with one hand. A loud noise rang out as the sovereign's immortal soul was enveloped in a pale green flame of extremely high temperature. The flame, which looked like colored glaze, began to burn the scale-covered palm, melting the scales and turning the flesh and bones into ashes. In just a blink of an eye, the palm was reduced to bones. However, Wu Qi had forcibly inserted the great cosmic soul-locking seal, a vicious mystic art in the scroll of stealing, into the sovereign's immortal soul. Countless information flashed across Wu Qi's spiritual ocean. Then, he clenched his palm, which had been burned to the point where only 5 purple bones were left, and forcibly extracted all the memories related to alchemy and fire control from the sovereign's weakened immortal soul. At the same time, Wu Qi compressed and released the chaotic energy in his body, and a wisp of the pale green flame wrapped around the sovereign's immortal soul was absorbed by the chaotic energy as well, turning it into a flame inside Wu Qi's spiritual ocean, hovering together with the divine flame of order and the divine flame of heaven burning. This light green glazed flame was the great void peaceful glazed divine flame of the sky beyond heaven above the 9 heavens. It was the most powerful demon-subduing flame in the Tao sect. It had an extremely mystical effect when used to refine pills and weapons. In the past, Wu Qi could only use the divine flame of order to refine artifacts, but now that he had the divine flame of great tranquility, the magical treasures crafted with the same materials and techniques would definitely be at least a few times stronger than those crafted with the divine flame of order. After all, the divine flame of order was only good at dealing with various fiends and evil spirits, while the divine flame of great tranquility was the real flame that specialized in refining artifacts and pills. After quickly and forcibly merging all the memories related to alchemy in the sovereign's body into his innate divine soul, Wu Qi clenched his fist and extracted the innate pure yang universal scripture from the sovereign's immortal soul. After quickly merging the tens of millions of words of the innate pure yang universal scripture into his innate divine soul, Wu Qi opened his mouth and coughed out a mouthful of blood, then staggered backward. Pointing a finger at the sovereign, he cried out, "Evil Taoist, what kind of ghost flame did you use to burn my palm?" Flustered and exasperated, Wu Qi let out a long roar. He opened his mouth and shot out a crimson flame that carried the stench of water unique to dragons, smashing viciously onto the sovereign's immortal soul. The crimson flame was a mystic technique from the dragon kill, the true dragon soul refining flame. Fused with the essence of the natal core flame of dragons and the directorate of Celestial's ghost flame, it was extremely powerful and had a terrible lethality to the immortal souls of immortals. The sovereign's immortal soul, which was on the verge of disintegration, let out a bitter laugh as it shrank by more than 40% after being burned by Wu Qi's true dragon soul refining flame. Just as Yu Gu and King Yang Qiu were about to rush forward to capture the sovereign's immortal soul and interrogate it, the sovereign heaved a long sigh and abruptly burst out of his immortal soul. Yu Gu gave a strange cry, grabbed King Yang Qiu and Wu Qi, and fled as fast as he could. "Run for your lives! How could a mighty primordial immortal detonate his immortal soul? This is unreasonable," he bellowed furiously. Yu Gu's supreme tower flew up into the sky and rolled up all of King Yang Qiu's subordinates in the myriad poisons formation, then abruptly broke through the void and fled. Without making a sound, the sovereign's immortal soul disintegrated. A strong purple light swept across a radius of 10 billion miles, turning everything in its path into chaos. Immortal Ding Jun of the Celestial Court, the sovereign of the Myriad Immortal Alliance, had fallen. Chapter 708. Behind them was a vast grassland tens of millions of miles in circumference, surrounded by rolling mountains and dotted with countless lakes. Herds of beasts, numbering in the millions, were galloping happily across the grassland, kicking up clouds of dust and grass in their wake. In front of them was a vast wasteland, and in the distance, a sheet of purple light was slowly spreading toward them. Amidst the purple light, large tracts of mountains turned into nothingness. Gray chaotic energy pervaded the air and was quickly absorbed by the land masses in the distance. After absorbing the chaotic energy, the mountains grew taller and taller, and some of them, which were already tens of thousands of miles high, suddenly became several times taller, piercing through several layers of clouds. When the purple light was still thousands of miles away from Wu Qi and his companions, it slowly dissipated, turning into countless transparent golden flowers that drifted down from the sky. A pale golden rain of flowers began to fall from the sky, covering an area of 10 billion miles in circumference. Heavenly music could be heard drifting slowly down from the sky, and the clouds as far as the eye could see had all turned pale gold. Strange light shone out from behind the clouds, shining beams of light onto the ground, and all the flowers, trees, and beasts that were touched by the beams of light grew rapidly. Just below the supreme tower where Wu Qi and his companions were standing, a grassland about 100 miles in circumference was illuminated by a bright beam of light, which made the flowers, trees look extraordinarily strong and lush. A small tree, which was only tens of feet tall, suddenly grew to thousands of feet tall, its tip almost touching the base of the supreme tower. The tree was covered with a faint layer of green energy, which made it look extremely beautiful. It had transformed from an ordinary tree into a rare spirit tree. Meanwhile, the few lions lurking in the grass threw their heads back and roared joyfully. Their bodies, which were already about 30 feet long, quickly expanded to hundreds of feet long, their muscles bulging, their fur shining like gold, and their feet shrouded in wind and fire. Clearly, they were no longer ordinary beasts. Gradually, 3 pale purple clouds drifted over their heads, from which a golden rain of light fell, turning into 3 golden torrents that poured into Wu Qi, King Yangqiu, and Yu Gu's bodies. Wu Qi stared in horror at the purple clouds and the golden rain that poured into his body. What is this? This was the virtuous purple qi, and what was being injected into his body was the legendary heavenly Tao merit. As if molten gold was flowing into his body, every cell in Wu Qi's body was immersed in an astonishingly high temperature. However, such a high temperature didn't cause any harm to Wu Qi. Instead, he enjoyed the descent of merit. His body was shaking, and his soul was laughing. Every strand of his hair was dancing rapidly in the golden rain of light. Wu Qi narrowed his eyes. He suddenly sensed a mysterious aura from this golden rain of light. The calmness that had imprisoned Wu Qi for a long time and prevented him from breaking through disappeared without a trace, as if it had never existed. Endless Pangu's sacred energy rose from the ground, turned into purple waves, and rushed into Wu Qi's body. Normally, even the divine sense of immortals could not detect this purple energy. But today, the purple energy that poured into Wu Qi's body was too much and too strong, so much so that it had condensed into purple waves that could be seen by the naked eye. The torrents kept pouring into Wu Qi's body with deep, muffled whistles. Some of them were absorbed by his fleshly body, and some were transformed into chaotic energy. The strength of his fleshly body broke through again and again. In the second Panga heaven, he broke through the 1-star realm, the 2-stars realm, the 3-stars realm. In just a quarter of an hour, Wu Qi's true body of heaven and earth scripture had broken through to the 7-stars realm. The 7-stars realm of the second Panga heaven was a terrifying realm that was strong enough to fight against a 5th-tier gold immortal. A realm that could overturn rivers and seas, move mountains, and even destroy a small heavenly realm with just a wave of his hand. As the chaotic energy absorbed the purple energy, the Song of Gale, the Darkeen Water Scripture, the Inferno Hell Fiend Scripture, and the incomprehensible heavenly Tao in the innate pure Yang Universal Scripture were quickly fused into Wu Qi's innate divine soul under the push of the heavenly virtues. The heavenly Tao, which was originally difficult, bitter, and incomprehensible, became extremely simple at this moment, as if 1 + 1 = 2. Even the state of enlightenment that Wuqi often entered could not be compared to the speed of enlightenment that was being pushed by the heavenly virtues. In just a quarter of an hour, Wuqi's understanding of the heavenly Tao laws, especially the Song of Gale and the various secret techniques he cultivated, had broken through to the peak of the first-tier gold immortal realm. As his cultivation base improved, the chaotic energy in his body grew stronger and stronger, and his magic power rose steadily as well. The 18th tier gold immortal, the 17th tier gold immortal, the 16th tier gold immortal. When a golden wheel of virtues took shape behind Wuqi's head, Wuqi's magic power had quickly risen to the 5th tier gold immortal realm, which was exactly the same as the current realm of his fleshly body. But, the heavenly virtues that fell from the sky were still endless. Wuqi clenched his teeth and prepared to take the opportunity to raise his magic power to the highest level of his cultivation base. Ao Buzan sighed into Wuqi's ear and cried out in a low voice, "Magic power is not the foundation, but the divine soul is. Absorb all the remaining heavenly virtues into your divine soul, which will allow you to form an innate divine soul of virtue, making it invincible to all magic and evils." TSK, I can't believe that killing a primordial immortal can bring me so many virtues. What have these immortals done over the years that the heaven and earth cannot tolerate? It seems that the heaven and earth hate them to the core. Wuqi was taken aback. What evil things had the sovereign done that the heaven and earth could not tolerate? How could he make the heaven hate him to such an extent? The amount of heavenly virtues that kept falling like rain was truly terrifying. But then, Wuqi ignored this problem. Who cared what the sovereign had done? Just as Ao Buzan said, his magic power and cultivation base were just nothingness, which could be slowly improved with time. But, his divine soul was the foundation of everything. A strong divine soul could allow him to better control his power, better understand the profound principles of heaven and earth, and better master everything. The heavenly virtues that continued to fall from the sky quickly fused into Wuqi's innate divine soul. In his boundless spiritual ocean, the innate divine soul absorbed an immeasurable amount of heavenly virtues and quickly grew into a towering golden giant, whose body glinted with a golden light. The golden wheel of virtues hovered behind the giant's head, almost encompassing his entire body. Heavenly flowers, golden rain, and countless runes swirled around the giant, filling him with an inviolable air of majesty. The pouring of heavenly virtues lasted for a full hour, and the benefits Wuqi had gained from it were simply indescribable. For him, it was basically the same as being reborn once again. When the purple clouds of heavenly virtues slowly dissipated, every strand of Wuqi's hair was filled with a faint golden light, revealing a profound and elusive truth. Standing next to Wuqi, King Yangqiu's appearance did not change much, but his expression was extremely bizarre. Trembling, he looked at Wuqi, his eyes filled with the ecstasy that seemed to be on the verge of exploding. Grabbing Wuqi with one hand, he stammered, I've been rewarded by the heavenly Tao, by prolonging my life, by 1 aeon. Wuqi shuddered, and his scalp went numb. No matter how high the cultivation base of the humans in Diyu was, there was a limit to their lifespan. Ordinary people could only live for a little over 100 years, and those who practiced the true body of heaven and earth scripture and other cultivation techniques of the human race could live up to 100 years at most. But, if one could absorb a powerful beast soul and fuse it with one's own soul, the source of one's soul would become stronger, and depending on the strength of the beast soul, one could live for thousands, tens of thousands, or even several periods. But, even if the beast soul was the soul of a divine beast like the azure dragon or the white tiger, 12 periods was the limit, and if one wanted to prolong his life, he would have to take all kinds of rare spirit items of heaven and earth. But, there were limited spirit items that could prolong one's life, and if one took too many of them, one's body would develop a resistance to them, making it impossible to prolong one's life after taking the same spirit item multiple times. So, even the human emperor of Diyu, even if he could sit on the throne for dozens of periods, would eventually die. But, as a reward of the heavenly Tao, King Yangqiu's life was actually prolonged by 1 aeon. For members of the imperial clan of Diyu, what did 1 aeon of life mean? Perhaps, with his long life, he would have a chance to taste the throne of the human emperor. Sometimes, life was also a kind of capital, and an extremely important one. Wu Qi looked at King Yang Qiu with a smile on his face. It was simply wonderful to have a backer who could prolong his life by 1 aeon. If King Yang Qiu could really become the human emperor in the future. The smile on Wu Qi's face grew brighter as he bowed to King Yang Qiu sincerely and said, "Congratulations, Your Excellency. This is really good, really good." While King Yang Qiu was laughing like a fool, Yu Gu, who was standing next to him, burst out laughing as well. Yu Gu, who was so old and shriveled that he could die at any moment, had taken countless life-prolonging spirit herbs, and was at the end of his life. But now, he had transformed from a shriveled old man to a middle-aged man in his 30s. A strong energy and a vast aura spread out of him. Anyone with a discerning eye could tell at a glance that his life force had been completely restored, his lifespan had been greatly extended, and his cultivation base must have taken a big step forward as well. Killing a primordial immortal is like getting rid of a vermin for the heavenly Tao. Wonderful. Yu Gu stroked his beard and laughed. Killing a primordial immortal is so beneficial. What a pity. How can a primordial immortal be so easy to kill? Wu Qi and King Yang Qiu exchanged a glance, then suddenly threw their heads back and laughed wildly at the same time. Yes, the heavenly Tao had bestowed such virtues upon them by killing a primordial immortal, which was really delightful. But, how many primordial immortals were as unlucky as the sovereign? If primordial immortals were really prey that could be easily hunted, perhaps Yu would have teamed up and hunted them to prolong his life and improve his cultivation base. It was already a blessing from the heavens that they were lucky enough to kill the sovereign, and they could not ask for anything more. Yu Qingsheng, on the other hand, had an unsightly expression on his face. Gnashing his teeth, he stared at Wu Qi and clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug into the flesh of his palms. He was roaring furiously in his mind, why are there only 3 purple clouds of virtues? Why is even Wu Qi rewarded by the heavenly Tao? Didn't I, Yu Qingsheng, do anything to kill the sovereign? Boundless malice rushed to his head, and Yu Qingsheng's hatred for Wu Qi rose to a new height for no reason. He felt that if it were not for Wu Qi, the virtues and credit should have been his. Wu Qi turned to give Yu Qingsheng a cold look and sneered in his heart. "There's no hurry, I'll deal with you and your disciples as soon as I get back." Chapter 709. With banners fluttering and drums ringing, King Yang Qiu, his face beaming with joy, slowly drifted down from the supreme tower and stepped onto the cloud platform of his army. Tens of thousands of soldiers, their armors polished to a bright shine, held their heads high, and puffed out their chests as they looked at King Yang Qiu with fanaticism, shouting, "Long live your highness." Following closely behind King Yang Qiu, Wu Qi drifted down from the sky with narrowed eyes and a smile on his face, feeling the enthusiasm and excitement of the soldiers down below. The news that King Yang Qiu had successfully killed the sovereign and captured his son, Li Qinghua, had spread through the army, and the official report had been sent to Liangzhu as fast as possible. With such a great contribution, as long as Liangzhu responded, King Yang Qiu would not only be promoted, but all the generals and soldiers under his command would also be rewarded handsomely. They would definitely be promoted and rich, and many of them would even be conferred titles of nobility. Once they were conferred titles of nobility, they would be entitled to a beast soul and fuse with it. Not only would it greatly improve their overall strength, but it would also greatly prolong their lifespan. These were all real benefits. Even Yu Gu, who had always been shrouded in a ghostly aura, looked very different today. With a big smile on his face, he strolled triumphantly among the crowd, showing off his muscular body, which had regained its youthfulness. The enormous virtues of the heavenly Tao had brought him straight back to the age of 30, and with his current cultivation base, he could live for dozens of periods. The heavenly Tao had also recorded a great contribution for him, and his lifespan had been extended by a long time. The old fellow was so excited that his heart was about to explode. Those elders of the Yu clan in Liangzhu were about the same age as Yu Gu, and they did not have many years left to live. When those elders died, Yu Gu would be the oldest elder of the Yu clan in Liangzhu, the one with the highest status, and the strongest cultivation base. At that time, it would be a piece of cake for him to support his descendants to become the clan master of the Yu clan in Liangzhu. At that time, he would be the spokesperson of the Yu clan in Liangzhu, and all the high positions in the imperial court of De Yu would be up to him to choose. Killing a primordial unity golden immortal in exchange for so many benefits was worth it. Yu Gu even felt his lower body begin to heat up, and his little brother, who had not moved for tens of thousands of years, seemed to sense the arrival of spring. Squinting at the young and beautiful girls who had come to greet King Yangqiu, he wondered if he should quickly pick a few of the prettiest girls and take them to a remote tent to do something that only young people would do. Amidst the laughter, Yu Qingqing's face was the most unsightly. With a straight face, he wished he could hack Wu Qi to death with his sword. How could Wu Qi be the one to benefit so much? How did he get so much merit? Why not me? Why not Yu Qingqing? Why is it not the excellent, intelligent, wise, and brilliant Lord Yu Mianqing who gets all these benefits? He, Yu Qingqing, was an erudite scholar who knew everything about astronomy and geography, who could bring peace to a country with literature and rule a country with martial arts. He was simply an omnipotent man. But, Yu Qingqing's current cultivation base was only that of a 33rd tier heaven immortal, a nobody in the imperial court, and a military counselor who was often looked down upon by King Yangqiu's side. How could he be wronged like this? Yu Qingqing. How could you not use such a talented man? Instead, you put him in an important position. Gritting his teeth in exasperation, Yu Qingqing looked gloomily at King Yangqiu, and occasionally glanced at Wu Qi with resentment in his eyes. His heart was dripping with blood. At the same time, he was cursing the sovereign and his clan with great resentment. How could a primordial unity golden immortal be killed so easily? How could he be killed so easily? Couldn't he put up a fight? Couldn't he put up a fight with all his might? Couldn't he kill Wu Qi first and then detonate his immortal soul? Resentment rushed straight to his head, and a scarlet blood vessel twisted and wriggled on his forehead like a viper. With the honor of killing the sovereign, King Yangqiu returned to the headquarters of the army. After a grand celebration banquet, as King Yangqiu mobilized the army of hundreds of thousands marched toward the formation constructed by Lord Wandering Immortal. On the ground, hundreds of thousands of soldiers marched forward with thunderous footsteps. In the air, a large group of feathermen soldiers were flying in the air. Their dark wings formed a dark cloud that almost covered the sky. In the sky, hundreds of flying ships were led by the jade-armored Mystic Turtle flying ship, rushing forward like a dark cloud. This time, King Yangqiu had mobilized all his troops without reservation, including the 6 squads of soldiers he had hidden in the mountains thousands of miles away. Just now, during the celebration feast, Wu Qi had reported to King Yangqiu that because of the virtues of the heavenly Tao, his understanding of the Tao of formations had reached an extremely profound level, and that he could now break the formation constructed by the Lord of the Wandering Immortal Alliance with a wave of his hand. King Yangqiu was overjoyed. He immediately mobilized all his troops, planning to wipe out the Lord of the Wandering Immortal Alliance and all the other immortals after killing the sovereign. Wu Qi was telling the truth. The virtues of the heavenly Tao was an extremely magical power. After his divine soul had absorbed an enormous amount of virtues of the heavenly Tao and formed an innate divine soul of virtue, his understanding of the heavenly Tao seemed to have improved from the most primitive abacus to a giant calculator. In just an hour, he had thoroughly comprehended the essence of formations in the scroll of stealing, and had even derived endless mysteries from it. The formation, which had been tricky for Wu Qi, now seemed to be full of loopholes. With his current cultivation base of the 5th-tier gold immortal realm, he could easily break it. But, what good would it do to Wu Qi just to crack it? What he wanted to do was not to crack it, but to plunder it. He wanted to take the whole formation for himself. Not to mention anything else, just the tens of thousands of immortal artifacts forged according to the armaments used by the celestial lords were already an astronomical wealth. After being refined by Wu Qi with the divine flame of great tranquility, and then laid out a brand new celestial formation with the essence of formations he had comprehended, it was powerful enough to kill any existence below the realm of primordial immortal. Standing at the forefront of the cloud platform with King Yang Qiu, Wu Qi could not help but burst into laughter as he looked at the valley in the distance where the silvery light of stars towered into the sky. About 100 miles away, Wu Qi took a deep breath and sprayed out a plume of 9 nether ghost flame. His body abruptly grew to about 30 feet tall, and his skin was once again covered with black dragon scales. Carefully, the 2 dragon pythons raised their heads from Wu Qi's shoulder and quickly glanced at the murderous soldiers around them, then quickly shrunk their bodies to the size of earthworms and burrowed into Wu Qi's ear like Ao Buzan. Ao Buzan hid in Wu Qi's left ear, while the 2 dragon pythons hid in Wu Qi's right ear. No one had any objection to Wu Qi taking in the 2 dragon pythons. The warriors of Deyu always liked to keep some strange beasts, birds, and poisonous insects. Although these 2 dragon pythons were a little rare, it was not as if no one kept similar species. Even King Yang Qiu knew a few members of the imperial clan who kept the ancient fierce beasts, the 9-headed serpents. So, it was not a big deal. Exercising the dragon kill, Wu Qi transformed his body into the form of a dragon man and raised both hands. A plume of black smoke shot out of his fingertips, and in the next moment, hundreds of mountains, each 100 miles tall, were lifted off the ground amidst a deafening rumble. The roots of the mountains were separated from the ground, causing countless boulders to crumble and dust to rise high into the sky. A gust of wind swept across the place, causing many soldiers to lose their balance and nearly be swept away by the flying mountains. A total of 360 mountains were uprooted into the sky by Wu Qi with the mountain shifting spell, a mystic technique of the Directorate of Celestials. Standing off to one side, Yu Gu could not help but nod and exclaim, "Cultivating both fleshly body and magic is amazing." Tan Lang's mountain-moving incantation has already fully grasped its essence, it's too wonderful for words. Wu Qi laughed and said, "You flatter me, Elder Yu." He put his palms together, and the mountains flew toward Wu Qi. Then, a plume of 9 nether ghost flame, black as ink, sprayed out of his palms. Amidst a sizzling noise, the mountains shrank rapidly, and before long, the hundreds of miles tall mountains were reduced to 3 feet tall. Although they had shrunk in size, their weight did not change at all. Their density had been compressed to an extreme, so much so that they were comparable to the materials of the cores of the stars in outer heavenly realms, which had been tempered by all kinds of great natural forces day and night. Wu Qi soared into the sky with both hands holding the small hills, then casually sprinkled them into a valley not far away. Accompanied by a loud, muffled boom, Wu Qi threw the mountains into the formation constructed by Lord Wandering Immortal, sealing off the 360 most important energy circulation veins in the formation. Immediately, a deafening rumble rang out from the formation. Countless starlight towered into the sky, and the mountains inside the formation crumbled one after another. The immortals stationed on the mountains howled miserably as they were shredded to pieces by the violent star power. Wu Qi's understanding of the essence of formations from the scroll of stealing had reached the state of Tao heart illumination, and he could now comprehend 10,000 of them. Therefore, it did not take him much effort to crack the formation constructed by Lord Wandering Immortal. After blocking off the energy circulation veins of the formation collapsed immediately, and the army of hundreds of thousands of soldiers quickly surrounded the entire valley. A dark cloud rose into the sky. Li Qinghua, who was tied to a stone stake and bound by black metal chains like a rice dumpling, was howling in pain as he was escorted to the sky above the valley by dozens of burly executioners. Complacently, King Yang Qiu flew to the sky above the valley with his trusted subordinates. Smiling at the immortals who were running around in panic, he said, "Lord Wandering Immortal, the sovereign of the Myriad Immortal Alliance has been beheaded, and I've captured Li Qinghua alive. Why don't you surrender now? Are you still going to put up a stubborn resistance?" Amidst Li Qinghua's hoarse howl, Lord Wandering Immortal and the other gold immortals of the Alliance breathed a long sigh and committed suicide in front of everyone. They dispersed their immortal bodies and immortal souls, and did not put up any resistance. Wu Qi fished out 360 refined star beads from the pool in the valley. Now that he was King Yang Qiu's trusted subordinate, who would dare to compete with him for these treasures? Each of these star beads was a top-grade gold immortal artifact that the sovereign had personally crafted with hundreds of millions of kilograms of materials. If all 360 star beads were used in unison, their power would be unparalleled. But now, they had benefited Wu Qi. Over the next year, King Yang Qiu, Wu Qi, and others escorted Li Qinghua to and fro Diyu. Wherever Li Qinghua went, as soon as the news of the sovereign's death was learned by the immortals of the alliance, all the immortals committed suicide, and no one dared to fight against the army of Diyu. In just 1 year, the myriad immortal alliance, which had once turned the whole of Diyu upside down, was completely pacified. For a time, the imperial court of Diyu was shaken, and the name of King Yang Qiu spread far and wide. Meanwhile, Tan Lang, the pseudonym of Wu Qi, the county governor of the East Sea of Hai Province and the military minister of Hai Province, had also caught the attention of the important ministers of Diyu. Chapter 710. King Yang Qiu's army was stationed in Greenwood Plain. The plain, which measured more than 100 million miles in both width and length, was covered with lush green grass. Thousands of wild beasts lurked amidst the grass, and countless wildflowers were in full bloom, their petals as big as water tanks. At first glance, the vast Greenwood Plain looked like a rainbow draped over the grassland. It was an indescribably beautiful scenery. There were no other plants on the vast plain, except for a towering shadowless green tree that stood 1,000 miles tall in the middle of the plain. Near the ground, the tree was tens of miles thick, and its bark was as smooth as a glass. A green light shone through it, illuminating thousands of miles away. From top to bottom, this shadowless green tree only had dozens of clean branches, decorated with thousands of giant leaves that were several miles in circumference. Whether it was the branches or the leaves, they all looked like they were carved from green jade, completely clear and without any impurities. Even at noon, when the sun was directly facing the shadowless green tree, it would not cast a shadow on the ground. Since the great Saint Pangu transformed into Pangu continent, this divine tree had been growing quietly in Greenwood Plain, absorbing the essence of the sun and the moon day and night. It was the most famous ancient divine tree in Diyu's territory. Every day, the shadowless verdant wood would secrete about 1,000 drops of sticky, fragrant verdant wood divine elixir. Each drop of this verdant wood divine elixir weighed tens of thousands of kilograms. It had the miraculous effect of strengthening bones, strengthening internal organs, replenishing vitality, and stabilizing the soul. If a Diyu warrior, whose cultivation base had reached the peak of the 9 stars realm of the first Panga heaven, took a drop of greenwood divine liquid, his cultivation base would be able to steadily break through to the second Panga heaven overnight. If a warrior whose cultivation base had reached the second Panga heaven took a few drops of greenwood divine liquid, the strength of his fleshly body would certainly break through the realm of 1-star realm. The greenwood divine liquid was extremely precious, and only generals who had made rare military contributions were qualified to set up camp in Greenwood Plain. During the period when they were stationed, all the greenwood divine liquid secreted by shadowless green tree would be distributed by the general who had made the meritorious service, and could be rewarded to his subordinates at will. After making a great contribution, setting up camp in the Greenwood Plain, leading the army straight to Yuxiong Plain, and finally arriving in Liangzhu to receive the human emperor's reward. This was the grandest reward ceremony that the Diyu dynasty gave to the generals who had made great contributions. According to the amount of military service rendered, one could be stationed in Greenwood Plain for 3 days, 6 days, or even 9 days. But King Yang Qiu's army had been stationed here for 36 days. The vast Greenwood Plain, which measured 100 million miles in circumference, had been cursed by a great oracle of the ancient Directorate of Celestials. Although it existed on Panga continent, it had been isolated into a separate space, and only generals who had rendered great meritorious services and their subordinates were allowed to set up camp in it. King Yangqiu's army had been stationed in Greenwood Plain for 36 days, which was the longest in the last eon. He had killed the sovereign of the Myriad Immortal Alliance, captured Li Qinghua alive, and spent a year touring around the world with him. The collapse of the alliance, countless immortals of the alliance had committed suicide, and almost all the itinerant cultivator powers on Pangu continent had been completely destroyed. Such an amazing contribution was worthy of King Yangqiu setting up camp in Greenwood Plain for 36 days. Over King Yangqiu's military camp, Yugu's supreme tower was hovering on a cloud. The human emperor was overjoyed when he heard that Yugu had been rewarded by the virtue of the heavenly Tao for helping King Yangqiu kill the sovereign. When he returned to Liangzhu, he would definitely be rewarded handsomely, and he would certainly have more power in the Directorate of Celestials. Delighted, Yugu simply followed King Yangqiu's army on a tour around the world, working with Wu Qi to break through countless strongholds of the alliance and kill many immortals of the alliance. At the moment, a feast was being held in the Supreme Tower. In one of the halls, King Yangqiu and a group of close courtiers were having a wild time with a group of teenage girls. If they were in the main tent, King Yangqiu, as the commander of the army, would not dare to be so unrestrained. But, in Yugu's Supreme Tower, King Yangqiu could let go of the restraint in his heart and enjoy everything he wanted. Naked teenage girls ran around the hall, screaming and screaming, while King Yangqiu Fengbua, and other military officers, who were also nearly naked, chased after them, laughing and playing. If any teenage girls were caught by them, they would immediately engage in a hand-to-hand fight. In a corner of the hall, dozens of teenage mermaids were soaking in a pool, either playing musical instruments or singing the most enchanting music of the mermaids in a low voice to liven up the atmosphere. The hall was filled with the fragrance of ambergris, which Yugu had carefully concocted. It was gentle, smooth, and had a great aphrodisiac effect, which made King Yangqiu and the others panting and entangled with the teenage girls. There was a small door in a corner of the hall, behind which was a dimly lit secret chamber. Yugu, a withered tree that had been revived, was excitedly having sex with dozens of teenage girls from various clans on a huge bed. Like an old wolf in heat, Yugu threw his head back and roared into the sky, twisting and turning with the teenage girls into a pile of flesh. He was too embarrassed to fool around with King Yangqiu and the other juniors, but in this relatively closed secret chamber, he could unleash all the anger that he had been holding back for tens of thousands of years, and no one could stop him. But these erotic scenes had nothing to do with Wu Qi. At the moment, Wu Qi was in the secret chamber in the deepest part of the Supreme Tower, completely isolated from the outside world by sealing off the void with the ancient divine runes of the Book of Ancient God. It had taken King Yangqiu a year to conquer the Myriad Immortal Alliance, and during that time, Wu Qi had spent most of his time refining various materials, in addition to helping King Yangqiu break the defensive formations in the Alliance's strongholds. Now that he was the most popular man at King Yangqiu's side, and one of the three men who were rewarded by the virtues of the heavenly Tao for killing the sovereign, Wu Qi's power had become so great that no one would say anything when he took out a large number of rare materials from King Yangqiu's armory at will. The secret chamber was originally only about 100 feet in length and width, but after Wu Qi cast the ancient divine runes recorded in the Book of Ancient God into the surrounding walls, the space immediately expanded to 100 miles in both width and length, and about 10 miles in height. Now, there were countless materials piled up in the vast space. They were the rare materials Wu Qi had taken out of the armory over the past year, and they had all been carefully refined by Wu Qi with the divine flame of great tranquility, so all the impurities in them had been removed. Sitting cross-legged in the middle of the secret chamber, he glanced complacently at the countless materials placed around him. Then, he carefully scanned the surroundings with his innate divine will. After completely eliminating the possibility of being peeped at, he carefully spat out a hassock that emanated a towering cold air from his mouth. At the same time, he spat out the soul of the Darkeen hassock, the item spirit of the Darkeen hassock, the soul of the Darkeen hassock. After being nourished by the water element energy provided by Wu Qi for so many years, the soul of the Darkeen hassock had grown to a height of about 30 feet, and its body was so condensed that it looked like a corporeal body. 49 waves of water were wheeling and dancing around it like white dragons, emanating a frighteningly mighty aura. After being dragged out from Wuqi's spiritual ocean, the Darkeen Hasek lazily opened its eyes and woke up from its slumber. The soul of the Darkeen Hasek, which looked like a seahorse and had 6 transparent wings on its back, smacked its lips and rubbed its wings against each other. Then, it gave Wuqi a look, then sprung to its feet abruptly and cried out in surprise, "How many years has it been? How come you already have the cultivation base of a gold immortal?" With a smile on his face, Wuqi looked at the Hasek. He spat out the star shark blade and said coolly, "My luck is pretty good. After killing a primordial immortal, the virtues bestowed upon me by the heaven pushed my cultivation base to this level." Cut the nonsense. The promise you made back then is going to be fulfilled now. I'm going to craft a supreme tower, my prime magical artifact, and you have to be the item spirit of my supreme tower. When he met Wuqi years ago, he promised that once Wuqi reached the realm of gold immortal, he would be at Wuqi's beck and call. But now, Wuqi's cultivation base had reached the level of a 5th-tier gold immortal, which made him much stronger than his former master, Lady Dark Goldwater. Therefore, he naturally obeyed Wuqi's will. Now, Wuqi's cultivation base was not as strong as it was in the past. With just a finger, he shattered the star shark blade and allowed the Darkeen Hasek to devour it completely. Even the soul of the green dome shark was devoured by the Hasek. After that, Wuqi smashed the Darkeen Hasek's true form with a palm strike, then shot out a stream of divine flame of great tranquility from his palm, burning the soul and the fragments of the Darkeen Hasek to his heart's content. A shrill cry came out of the Hasek's mouth. It was a painful cry, but it was filled with excitement and joy. The divine flame of great tranquility kept purifying the impurities in Cattail Hasek's soul. At the same time, wisps of chaos energy kept flowing into Cattail Hasek's soul, making his soul purer and more condensed, transforming step by step from Hotian to Xiantian. The divine flame of great tranquility surged out of Wuqi's body like an ocean, melting all the materials that piled up like mountains around him. Under the control of Wuqi's powerful divine will, countless materials were perfectly mixed in the air according to a specific ratio. Countless streams of molten metal glowed with various colors in the air, colliding and fusing with each other, filling the air with dazzling sparks. In just a blink of an eye, a supreme pagoda shaped like an Egyptian pyramid appeared above his head. It was pitch black in color, standing about 1 mile tall at its highest point, and about 1 mile long at its base. With his enormous divine will being sent into the pagoda, Wuqi poured all the magical ancient divine characters he found in the Book of Ancient God into the pagoda. Inside the pagoda, countless divine characters transformed into enormous and extremely complicated diagrams of divine characters, nested together into a perfect whole. One by one, Wuqi threw the 360 star pearls he took from the core of the star formation constructed by Hall leader Wandering Immortal into the pagoda, forming a complete heavenly star-killing formation inside the pagoda. These star pearls were spirit items personally crafted by the sovereign, and each of them could affect the power of a star, possessing a very strong power. A green flame swept across everything. For this day, Wuqi had been preparing for it for a whole year. He coughed out a mouthful of blood and sprayed it onto the pagoda. With a flip of his hands, he threw the broken pieces of the Darkeen Hasek and the item spirit of the great ocean water-dividing dragon into the pagoda, completely merging it with the star formation. A vast amount of cold air burst out of the pagoda, followed by a vast expanse of starlight that turned into a colorful aurora. The pitch-black pagoda did not have the slightest luster, but its exterior was filled with all the colors in the world, making it look very mysterious and magnificent. Wuqi nodded with satisfaction and smiled. With a casual wave of his hand, he sent the pagoda into his spiritual ocean and nourished it with his own energy. King Yang Qiu had mentioned to Wuqi that he intended to cultivate Wuqi into a supreme oracle, one who cultivated both fleshly body and magic. Every supreme oracle would have a supreme tower crafted by Dayu's Directorate of Celestials, but Wuqi did not need their help. He could craft a supreme tower that suited him best. The Darkeen Celestial Tower was a supreme magical artifact Wuqi had crafted for himself. It was a freak that combined the artifact crafting techniques of the immortals and the oracles of the Directorate of Celestials, as well as Wu Qi's chaotic energy. In the future, it could even devour foreign objects to improve itself. As he sensed the energy tides triggered by the Dark Yin celestial tower constantly devouring chaotic energy in his body, Wu Qi's heart suddenly raced a few times. Suddenly, Wu Qi began to calculate with his fingers, and a sinister smile suddenly appeared on his face. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.